Good afternoon. So we're going to go ahead and get started. I see it's 1:46. We've got a full afternoon, and I'm sure we're going to be getting tired by the time we get around to the last panel. So welcome. Really excited to see everyone here today. I'm Caroline Thomas Jacobs, Chief of Headquarters Operations for Response at California Office of Emergency Services. Cal-OES is one of the host agencies for this summit, and really excited to see everyone here. It's been a pleasure working with the other host agencies to put it together. So this afternoon, what we're focused on track 2, there's another track going on in the other big room, is situational awareness and using all of the amazing amounts of data that we all get overwhelmed with effectively to be able to respond quicker and more effectively for our constituents. So I'm going to walk through kind of what the plan is for the afternoon, and then we'll just jump right into it. So we've got, the structure that we've got for the track is that we've got 2 lightning presentations. Both of those will be about 15 minutes. Then we'll jump into the first panel on signals intelligence and what those big data sets are and how we could effectively use those. Each panel will be structured where the panelists have been prepped with some questions to come and comment for about 5 minutes or so on those questions, then a facilitated discussion with the moderator, and then open for questions afterwards. Then we'll have a short break after the first panel. Then we'll do 2 additional lightning presentations, and then the last panel. And we'll work hard to stay on track here so that we can fit it all in by 5 o'clock. So with that, I'm going to invite up Clyde Wheeler. He's an applied scientist with Descartes Labs. Where he uses artificial intelligence to turn images and data into actionable information. Prior to Descartes Labs, Clyde worked in the space industry building small satellites at the UTTIAS Spaceflight Laboratory and at Surrey Satellite Technology Limited. So with that, Clyde.
Thank you. Really excited to be here. So I'm an applied scientist at Descartes Labs, and we've been using basically satellite imagery and advanced analytics to build a wildfire detector and tracking system. And just to give you guys like a little bit of context as to who Descartes Labs is, we're a company based out of Santa Fe, New Mexico. We actually originally spun out of the Los Alamos National Laboratory. Since then, we've raised $38 million in venture capital and have grown to just under 100 people. And we're working on building a digital twin of the Earth using satellite imagery, machine learning, AI, and high-performance computing. So being a company based in northern New Mexico, wildfires are really quite present on everybody's minds, especially during the summer months. And actually, what spurred us to create a wildfire detector was a few of us went up running in the mountains. And as we sort of crested this mountain ridge, we see this big plume of smoke just over the horizon. And it was what we would later find out to be the Ute Park fire, which would go on to burn tens of thousands of acres. So we kind of started to ask ourselves, what can we do to help? And we started by having a look at the traditional wildfire detection methods. And traditionally, wildfires have been detected by people, be that where they live, where they're traveling on the road, by pilots, commercial pilots flying overhead, or through dedicated fire infrastructure. So that's things like wildfire or fire lookout towers, which have been on kind of the decline in the United States over the past few decades, or through dedicated aerial reconnaissance flights, which are flown during periods of high risk, although these are pretty expensive and used sparingly. So we've identified that there's still quite a few gaps in these traditional detection methods. You can see this quite clearly in a spatial sense, in that on this map, there's still fairly large areas of black where basically no detection method has any coverage. But also temporally, this is basically a snapshot of California at about, I think it was 3 p.m. We gathered all this data for all the flights and stuff. But things look very different in the night. There's far less air traffic overhead. There's less people on the roads. People go to sleep. And those that do remain awake through the night, the visibility is much lower. Most wildfires are actually reported from smoke sightings rather than seeing actual flames. And obviously that's pretty hard to do in the night. So we decided to sort of leverage what we know best and build a wildfire detector based on satellite imagery and machine learning. And the idea here is that we're going to try to plug some gaps in these traditional detection methods. We're not seeking to like replace anything, but only to augment. And the reason I say that is because satellite images have some strengths in that they see basically everything at once, like the whole state, and they see it day and night. But you're still, these images are being collected from space. It's a coarser view of what's going on the ground than if you actually had eyes on the situation from actual people. So with that, we've set for ourselves a few concrete goals. We want to detect 3 large wildfires per year. And by large, I mean, we don't have an exact definition here, but probably like larger than 10,000 acres. We want to have as few false positives as possible. So as few sort of false fires, false reports essentially, as possible. Because we don't want to inundate wildfire response organizations with what amounts to, false reports. We want to build something that's actually useful. So we're building this detector using a pair of satellites called GOES-16 and GOES-17. These are brand new satellites. They just went operational in the last year or so. And they're what's called geostationary satellites. So basically they just sit above the same point on the Earth and constantly capture images. So GOES-16 sees basically the entire Western Hemisphere, while GOES-17 sees kind of like the Pacific Rim, Pacific United States. And interestingly enough, they both have overlapping views of California, which should prove pretty useful. And GOES-16 and 17 have a lot of cool things about them that make them sort of ideal for catching wildfires early on, shortly after ignition. The first is that they essentially view the world in real time. They capture images every 5 minutes of the continental United States for GOES-16 and the Pacific United States for GOES-17. And they capture images of the full disk every 15 minutes. And the full disk is basically what I showed you in the last slide there. And after that, after the images are captured, it takes us only about a few minutes to get them onto the platform, onto our platform where we can actually do something with them, like make a wildfire detection. So there's not really much latency at all. Another sort of crucial feature of the GOES pair of satellites is that they see the Earth in the thermal infrared spectrum. So what this means is they're basically measuring the temperature of the Earth. And obviously, since wildfires are really hot, they appear as like these really high contrast hotspots, which are reasonably easy to detect. The only downside here is that our pixels are, like our grid basically that we're measuring is 2 by 2 kilometers in size. That's pretty coarse for satellite imagery. That doesn't mean that the fire has to be 2 by 2 kilometers. It's just that the fire has to be sort of concentrated and hot enough such that the average temperature of that pixel raises above some detectable threshold. So all of this sort of combines and enables us to build a wildfire detector that's essentially real time. It's always on day and night, and it sees the entire United States. And of course that comes with the downside that I sort of alluded to before, in that the wildfires we're looking at, for us to detect them early on, they kind of need to be burning quite quickly. But if I had the choice between detecting a quickly burning wildfire versus a slowly burning one, I'd choose the quickly burning one. So that's not necessarily a bad thing. This is what a wildfire burning looks like from the eyes of GOES-16. And what you're seeing here is basically the red is the temperature being measured, and this is a campfire. So red is temperature, and I've also plotted in blue 911 calls as they're coming in, just to sort of give you a sense of scale for the disaster as it's unfolding. And basically what I want you to take away from this slide is that basically the moment of ignition, that one pixel is going to be a lot brighter than it normally is, and it's also going to be brighter than its neighbors. And this is sort of like the fundamental starting point for building our detector. We need to figure out how to leverage these two facts. And if we also consider that wildfires for a given area are also pretty rare, we can basically treat this as an anomaly detection problem. So wildfires are rare for a given area, they're hotter than normal, and they're hotter than their surroundings. And when I say hotter than normal, I mean in sort of like an absolute simplistic sense. We're just looking at the Earth and it's really hot. In a physical sense, if we're like physically modeling the fire as like a Planck black body, basically simulating the physics of it, or if we're just like looking into the past, it's a lot hotter than, for instance, what we would expect based on the past 30 days. So what we end up doing is we model what normal looks like and then just compare the current situation as seen by GOES with what we think normal is and detect wildfires on that basis. So we've been working on this project for about 2 months now, and we just made basically, or we just collected our first results, and we did it over the 2018 wildfire season, basically April, May of 2018, over New Mexico and a portion of Texas. And what you're seeing here, each of these dots is a wildfire where the size indicates, or the radius of the dot indicates how big in acres the fire ended up being. And the green fires are basically ones we detected before they were reported, and the yellow fires are the ones that were reported before we detected them. And as you can see, we've made some detections of some pretty big fires, so that's pretty good. Promising, I would say. Some of these wildfires we're detecting as much as 2 hours before they're reported. So you can do quite a bit in that time span to suppress that fire and make sure at least that it doesn't harm anyone in the area. I will say that there was one false positive. It's not in this image, and it was caused by a bunch of solar panels, an array of solar panels. And basically, when the sun lines up just right, it essentially dazzles our detector. But we're already working on a fix for that. As part of some other projects at Descartes, we're mapping solar infrastructure, so we'll just basically mask out and ignore those pixels when we operationalize this detector. So just to conclude, the initial results seem quite promising. We've detected a bunch of large fires, upwards of 25,000 acres. So we're hopeful that this will be useful in the future. The next immediate step is basically to operationalize this detector and basically run it in real time. We'll start at something like the state level and then sort of scale it up to the whole United States and then basically the entire Western Hemisphere. Simultaneously, we also want to start working with and start trialing this detector with wildfire response organizations. We really want this thing to be useful, so it's really important for us to understand the requirements of these organizations. So yeah, if you're interested, please come and talk to me after this presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. One thing I forgot to mention in my opening comments was I don't know if they mentioned it in the beginning of the day. I might have missed it. But one of the things we're doing with this summit is the main outcome that we wanted to have was to be able to present all of the needs and then have discussion about potential solutions. So we've actually got people taking notes in all of these different sessions, and we're going to be drafting up a report from the summit. So keep that on your radar. I don't know exactly how long it'll take us to put the report together and get it up on the website, but know that there will be a documentation post-summit to try and summarize some of these key ideas, because we really want to spur an ongoing conversation about how to leverage technology to leap us forward in our capabilities. So next up, we've got Jeff Pauska and Leonard Lee. Jeff is the senior manager with Hitachi's business transformation practice. He holds 2 Bachelor of Science degrees in Finance and International Business from Indiana's Kelley School of Business and is currently pursuing his MPA in Strategy at Northwestern's Kellogg School of Management. Bringing a combination of industry thought leadership from Japan and overseas ventures and leveraging $100 billion in Hitachi's portfolio, he has successfully deployed strategies within capital investment industries to help scores of utilities worldwide improve safety, reliability, productivity, and financial performance. And Leonard Lee is the founder and CEO of Dispatchr. So with that, Jeff and Leonard.
Testing. I think the microphone works. Sorry, there's not a lot of stage space here. So today we are talking about a wildfire prevention system. Not during a wildfire, not after, before. And this is the collective where we're sharing data, algorithms, and machine learning insights. So I challenge this audience to think about one notion today. Deep learning to prevent every single utility-involved wildfire. Every utility-involved wildfire. So how are we going to do that? By taking data, by taking algorithms, by taking best-in-class from the utilities, from the state. We can combine these things into our platform. And the platform gets smarter over time. The more data, the more insights that the platform has through a deep learning system, the more accurate and precise it becomes. If we had 10 arborists go through a forest outside the Sierras and identify healthy trees that could potentially fail in 80-mile-an-hour sustained winds, they'd come back with 10 different answers. Only through machine learning and data science can we actually achieve what we have not today, which is preventing wildfires. Next, we're going to show you, not hypothetical, not a diagram. We're going to show you something that's not 5 years away, but today, a system that Leonard's going to walk you through to prevent all utility-involved wildfires.
Okay, I'll talk. This is our statewide wildfire prevention platform. Here's our problem. We have potentially 130 million plus probable ignition points in the state of California. How do we find which one of those ignition points are the ones that potentially cause catastrophic disaster? That's what we're trying to solve here. We used to be able to check that annually by either taking arborists, inspectors, tree crews going out, walking every single mile of that line, and identifying what the potential threat is. That's manually intensive, time-consuming, and potentially prone to error. We can no longer afford to do that. So in order to be able to solve this problem, we need to be able to take on different data sets and analysis that's already being done from the various utilities and third parties, as well as our own predictions, to be able to then identify and prioritize the highest probability ignitions. A simple way of understanding this is when you guys probably got here today, you might have used Google Maps, Waze, or some other navigation system to get you here. Just a couple decades ago, we might have used paper maps. Maybe it transformed to Garmin. But now we are layering on top of that multiple data sets from third parties, government entities that have road sensor data. We take user anonymous data, and now you have a fairly accurate prediction, including historical data as well, of how long it'll take you to get here. That is a very simple way of explaining how we take meteorological forecasts for wind, humidity, the FPI, fire modeling, other environmental data to determine the highest risk of ignition and the associated impact. As we zoom in, you can pinpoint the specific collection of trees that are highest risk, even just 3 days out from an actual event. And then you can dispatch crews to prevent those ignitions from ever occurring. Here, you can actually see specifically which collection of trees are the ones most at risk and the data associated around them, and mitigate them appropriately. This was not possible if you had to search through the entire set of 130 million plus ignition points. So we take this initial problem that we stated of a huge amount of potential liability and problems across the state, and we can reduce that search size from 130 million trees all the way down to 130 trees that you can now effectively mitigate days before any event occurs. Oops. And to put this into context, we're at a seminal moment for this industry. This conference was put together, for something that we as an industry can solve right now. If you think about it, other industries have done this. The airline industry. If you take an example from the 1956 timeframe, there was a United Airlines flight that flew over the Grand Canyon. And as it was flying, it was out of radar range. It flew by a cloud, and as it came past this cloud, a TWA flight came from the opposite part of that cloud, and they had a mid-air collision. After that moment, the FAA figured out that they needed to figure out how to leverage technology at the time, data that they could use to prevent future mid-air collisions. That was the impetus for what they now call the Collision Avoidance System, right, the TCAS, in combination with radar to identify the speed, altitude, direction of all airplanes so that you prevent disasters like that in the future. We can do that now here with the utilities.
And what Leonard just showed was a system capable of processing vast and large amounts of data statewide. Every single tree, every single asset, in real time, and 3 days in advance. If we look at the preventable causes of ignition, the vast majority, half, is the trees. So if we can fix the tree problem, we're halfway there. We're halfway to zero. So as Elizaveta Malyshenko said in her August testimony, the problem isn't the clearances. The problem is identifying the healthy trees off right of way that are blowing into large, high voltage power lines and causing some of the most destructive and catastrophic wildfires this state has seen. So with that, I'd like to close with, trees are the problem. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. I just have to say, though, I do like trees. All right, so we're going to move on to the panel section. So we've got 4 panelists. John Horel is going to be introducing them, so I'll defer to him on that. But with John is a professor at the University of Utah in the Department of Atmospheric Sciences. His work centers on the observation and analysis of weather and climate processes in mountainous regions, Mesa West and Synoptic Labs, which provide access to surface weather observations. He is also involved in research and development related to fire weather applications and air quality in the Wasatch Front and the, oh, I don't know how to say that word, so I'm not going to say that one. Is it the UINTAHCH? Uintah. All right, Uintah Basin. That's a new one for me. All right, Dr. Horel has also won numerous awards for his work and has a PhD in atmospheric sciences from the University of Washington and a Bachelor's of Science in Meteorology from San Jose State University. So with that, I invite John up, and then if we could also have the other 4 panelists join John up here on stage, that would be great.
Yeah, so thanks very much. You know, it's just amazing to see how many people are here and addressing these questions today. So while they come up and get settled in, I mean, the purpose of this these panel sessions this afternoon is to have more of a discussion. And I think it's nice that we're in the smaller room because it'll be a little easier to have a discussion. There, if you want to, fill in, there are still some seats available as well. So if we take, how this whole session is being organized in terms of sort of the overall theme of improving situational awareness. What we're going to be doing is sort of having the panelists talk through a few questions in their opening remarks. Then we'll throw some additional questions to them, but we also want to have the audience involved in this. And so we're not dealing with a mic that you have to come up, but I would like you, if you are going to ask a question, to stand up and give us your name and affiliation, just so that we can have this as kind of a conversation. And also that'll roll into the evening reception where we start to get to know some of the people that you may not have already met. So if we think about it in terms of some of the big picture issues, is Mahesh? Oh, there we go. Come on up. So it gives me a few more minutes to talk through some of the things that we're going to discuss. Is what are the issues? How can we approach, threat detection, resource allocation, and operational deployment of equipment? So the two panels this afternoon, this one is kind of more operationally focused. The second one will also sort of morph into a little bit more discussion about communication onto other user bases and those kind of things. And I think one of the questions, this is a pretty broad topic, and the panel session is, it has sort of the intelligence framework. So one of the things is each of the panelists will be able to kind of put it in the context of how that ties into their own activities. So with that, I'll introduce Phillip SeLegue. Phil attended Crafton Hills and Riverside Community Colleges and received an associate's degree. He's assisted and been involved in many different activities related to all types of fire weather applications here in the state of California. Mobile communication units, the CERT program, NWCG situation, the Intel subcommittee, Scout administrator, and right now Phil is serving as a Type 1 Planning Section Chief Trainee for CAL FIRE Incident Management Team 5. We had the opportunity during the lunch period to sort of get together and talk through some of the topics that we're going to discuss. So I'll turn it over to Phil. You can just sort of stay there if you want, or if you want to come up here, you can do that too. So, Phil?
Sure. Well, good afternoon. Again, my name is Phillip SeLegue. I'm the Intel officer. My daily job is I'm out of our GAC, so it's a geographical location coordination center. We have two of them in the state of California. They're co-located, they're interagency, so we work with DOI partners as well as Forest Service, ourselves, and our cooperator OES. So on a daily basis, I monitor new and emerging fires, so as far as detection. So we have a few different tools that we would utilize to monitor threats as well as those detection efforts. Some of the things that we just seen on the last lightning presentation with the GOES, those are some of our standard products for detection. So we'll use the GOES 16, the GOES 17, the VERS, IGPoint, MODIS. We utilize those and can place them in an application that we use statewide called Scout, which is a collaborative situational tool. We have a lot of coordination with our National Guard partners as well. We have several programs that we're starting up and applications with them. We utilize some of their newer technology, as far as newer to us, might be a little more used and long in the tooth for them as far as war fighting. So it's kind of bringing some of that into the first responder realm, that we can harness some of those applications and those uses for not only detection, but mapping abilities and ongoing situational awareness.
Okay, thank you. Our next panelist is Brian Marshall. Brian is appointed as the fire chief at Cal OES in 2018. He served as the Kern County Fire Chief from 2012 until that time. Prior to that, he served as an incident commander and agency administrator on several wildfires in Kern County, including some of the big ones in that area, especially in 2011. As a national team member, Brian responded to Hurricane Katrina as a disaster search canine handler. He's earned his associates in fire technology at Bakersfield College. He's completed a lot of training in hazardous materials response, fire suppression tactics, and incident management. And he resides in Bakersfield. So, Brian?
Thank you, John. So as John said, I spent 32 years with the Kern County Fire Department, and in February I took over as the State Fire and Rescue Chief. So I bring a couple different perspectives to the panel today. In Kern County, we've been actually using technology for a long time, and it was very rudimentary. The U.S. Forest Service has a series of webcams in the Sierra forest, and whenever we had a fire where we knew that one of these webcams was looking at, we would get on those webcams in our Department Operations Center, take a look at what the fire, and again, it was very simplistic. The cameras were fixed. They updated every 5 to 10 seconds, so it was early technology, but we used that to know what was going on so we could make decisions on how we were going to approach the fire from the executive level in order to support our firefighters that were fighting the fire. So we've been using technology for a long time and continue to work with our partners to build our technology. In my new role as the State Fire and Rescue Chief, I manage the mutual aid system. So when there is a fire in Southern California or Northern California or anywhere in between, we are moving local government resources to support the suppression of that fire. And as was mentioned, there's not enough fire trucks to put in front of every house. So we have to manage our resources. And managing resources is having intelligence, knowing what the fire's doing. And there is a lot of technology that's moving forward today. I've never seen technology in the fire service move this fast. And it's events like this where we're learning as much as you're learning, because it's all about stopping the fire when it's small and making sure our firefighters go home and the public is not harmed by the fire. The partnerships, the collaborations that we have is absolutely important for the success of the California Fire Service. And what happens in California feeds out over the rest of the United States and the world. So thank you very much for being here.
Our third panelist is Mahesh Prakash. He's a senior principal research scientist at CSIRO from Australia, Data 61, and he leads a group of scientists, engineers, and software professionals who develop and apply a lot of different modeling and data assimilation techniques for urban and near urban environmental applications with a key focus on emergency and disaster management. His scientific and technical interests are in wildfire and flood modeling, geospatial big data analytics, and the confluence between environmental research and technology. He works closely with the business units in CSIRO in order to achieve much needed cohesion between deep science and technology expertise along with the other aspects that CSIRO provides. So with that, Mahesh.
Thanks, Shawn. So when I was actually invited to become involved in this panel discussion, one of the questions that I had was, what is signals intelligence? Because it could mean a whole lot of things for different people. So I'm just going to summarize the sorts of things or sorts of signals that we actually use for the different applications that we work on. So you've got your ground-based fixed sensors, which include cameras, but also sensors that give you an understanding of smoke and air pollution and those sorts of things. You've got your sensors mounted on drones, which actually provide intelligence at a different level. So thinking about that is quite important. Then you've got your aerial sensors, and drones are one of them. But there's also people actually sitting on the planes and taking imagery and so on. And you've got your satellite-derived data sets. And finally, your social media feeds as well, which are a form of sensor. So the challenge is actually how to actually assimilate the data sets that are coming out of all these different sources and get intelligence out of them in a timely fashion so that it can be used by emergency managers. Just moving on to potential applications that one can think of in these areas. So the obvious ones are things like early wildfire detection, and there's a fair few exhibits in this summit that are showcasing that application. There's the detection of vegetation signals caused by power lines, and CSIRO has done a bit of work in that along with collaborators from universities. There's actually an exhibit that you can look at the CSIRO booth. It's through our partners from RMIT University, so they've done some work around that. So that's, again, very interesting and applicable from an early detection of wildfires perspective. Also, gathering data around fire footprints, which is essential to understand how fires behave in various conditions, and using that data to actually drive better models. That is something that we are very interested in. Model data assimilation for faster predictions and better predictions is something that's going to be done a lot more than now because of the fact that we are getting high fidelity both from a spatial and temporal perspective. And then there's also work that we have been doing around evacuation. So evacuating people from different regions, and there's a need to actually understand human behavior there. So use of different types of sensors, especially video analytics, to understand how people behave when there are these sorts of situations. Simulating these situations and understanding their behavior is something that is also quite important. And then finally, I just wanted to get to a few challenges associated with usability of these sensors. The key one that we have in Australia, especially around drone usage, is regulations. So the equivalent of the FAA in Australia, it's called the Civil Aviation Safety Agency, CASA. We do have quite severe restrictions on use of drones at the moment. But that is something which, if properly managed, can actually give a lot of advantages in the emergency management space. Integrating a whole range of data sets from different sensors and coming up with a system that is actually able to do that is another huge The resolution of the data, the spatial and temporal resolution of the data, and how do you actually deal with that is another one. The energy requirements, so batteries that need to be running over a very long period of time, so maintenance issues associated with sensors is another challenge. Some of it has already been dealt with, others probably not as much. And the network density of the sensors. So, when you're actually trying to use the sensors for these applications, especially when you have microclimates which actually drive a lot of these behaviors, the density of the data that you can get that provides you that information is also highly relevant. I'll probably stop there.
Our fourth panelist is Nicole Lee, she is the Chief Technology Office at One Concern, based in Palo Alto, an AI company with a mission to save lives and livelihoods before, during, and after natural disasters. As the CTO for One Concern, Ms. Hu leads the company's diverse team of technology specialists and hazard scientists, combining AI and human learning to predict the impacts of natural disasters, including earthquakes, floods, and fires. In 2016, Nicole was named one of the world's top innovators in the Forbes 30 Under 30 edition. And prior to launching One Concern with its co-founders, she received her master's degree in machine learning from Stanford. So I'll turn it over to Nicole.
Thank you so much, John. So I'll probably go through a brief introduction of what One Concern does, and then why situational awareness concerns us in detail. So like John said, we are an AI platform for natural disasters. We look at existing research done in natural phenomena sciences and just really enhance that with machine learning and deep learning. We started around 4 years ago because one of the founders and my dear friend Ahmed was stuck on the roof of his home in Kashmir for around 7 days with no rescue. During that entire time, the question was, why isn't anybody coming and rescuing my family? And why is this still a problem in the 21st century? Why can't we still answer questions of who needs what rescue? So coupling all of that, we then started an initiative at Stanford, which really was an interdisciplinary science between structural engineering, earthquake engineering, and machine learning. We started with seismic then. 4 years down the line, we now created a multi-hazard platform, which allows you to predict really granular insights both before, during, and after disasters. During disasters, we answer questions like, which buildings are in what state of collapse immediately after or before an event happens. And before disasters, we answer questions like, what sort of mitigation actions do you need to create to holistically decrease your risk, and how do you do it in a data-driven way? Now, given that we are at the CPUC conference, I wanted to focus on wildfires in particular. The state of situational awareness is obviously, if not as large, maybe even larger as compared to seismic and floods. This is a place wherein fires are moving really rapidly, and it's obviously causing issues in not just lives of citizens, but even the lives of our first responders who are on the ground, wherein things can change very rapidly. So what do we do from technology to help that? So to that effort, we are building a deep learning algorithm which just predicts, obviously, where the fire is right now, and as well as uses that information to then predict more accurately where the fire will be going further on. But like Mahesh said, it's important to really collect historical fires, really understand how are fires behaving in the past. So to that effort, we've also collected hundreds of fires and looked at how these progress through time and space. And that's sort of what we do. Goal is to help create holistic resilience, and we really foresee a future wherein safety, sustainability, and equity is one of the top 3 factors in mind in terms of technology innovation. Thank you.
So hopefully that gave you a little bit of a sense of just the range of capabilities that we have up here, and I'll be turning it over to you to be able to sort of ask questions as well, but I do want to sort of kick this off a little bit and get the panelists to answer some of the, talk about some of the questions that were posed by the organizers. And one first was just to kind of open it up to the other panelists besides Mahesh, as far as what does signals intelligence mean to them? So, I mean, if Brian, Phil, Nicole, did you want to add anything as far as, what that kind of means, for your applications?
So I'll kick it off. Again, I have a dual role or dual knowledge coming from the local government fire chief to the fire and rescue chief. So this whole concept is about knowing what's happening before the fire starts and then when the fire does start. So as a local government fire chief, I want to make sure that I have the resources deployed in the right way when the conditions line up for a significant wildland fire. And we're taking this intelligence, this signals data, and we're putting it all into something in order to end up with a product. And that's kind of why we're here today, is to figure out what that something is, to take all that data so we can make an informed decision. When we upstaff strike teams of fire equipment, bulldozers, helicopters, it's very expensive to the taxpayers. So we want to be mindful of making the correct decision as we pre-position resources, upstaff, and make sure we have the capability to jump on a fire quickly to contain it while it's small. That's our goal. The other part of it being up here as the state fire and rescue chief, it's managing that entire fire and rescue mutual aid system. Late last summer, we had the Camp Fire, which started, and then in Ventura County, 2 fires broke out that were significant. So you can imagine the first fire that occurs, if we send all the resources to that fire, the Camp Fire, and then the Woolsey Fire, the Heel Fire are burning in Ventura County, and there's no resources available, then we haven't done our job as executives and fire chiefs. So again, taking that intelligence and putting it into the big picture at the state level, where we can move resources to optimize our attack on a wildland fire, it gives us the best chance of success. And then being able to see what those fires are doing, because at the end of the day, we may be asking the President of the United States to have a declaration because there's a major disaster going on. And being able to have that view, whether it be from a drone or a television news camera, all of this plays into it. All of it. And this is why these events, this technology summit today, is important to not only you, but to me as the state fire and rescue chief and the firefighters that are in the audience. That is what is going to make us successful. So that's kind of my overview of signals intelligence.
Nicole or Phillip?
Sure. So the question to me was, what is signaling? So I had to look it up. What is signaling? Is it a stop sign that is going to be held? So thinking about a stop sign, there's a pre and a post, right? So you see the stop sign that you're coming up to, and then so there's the pre-action, and then there's the action. So the action is stop. So signaling to me would be a pre and a post. So pre to us is we have fire danger operating plans. So we take in indices, so we take in fuels, their dryness, their compaction. We come up with dispatch levels. To me, that's a pre, that's a signal. The intel comes into now we know the state of the fuels, we know where resources are, we can pre-position resources. So what is the action? What is the post? What is the intel from that? So one of the things that we are lacking in is the ability for that intel. So if I asked a deployed military serviceman person, what is intel? What is forward observing? They would say, well, we take all this collaboration of everything. Well, I sent out this sat drone, this TAC pod, we're gonna grab all of these different data sets to make an intelligent decision. So when we talk about what is post and what we need help with is those detections. So now we can see those detections. Now we're starting to narrow down some of that latency, utilizing some of the satellites. So now we have the action, right? We have the fire, we have the incident, the emergency. So now we're on it. So now we send our resources to it, our field observers, those that gather intel that's on the ground. So now how does it transition from that pre to a post to assist that with continuing? So gathering all of that intel previously is kind of on that strategic level. How do we get it down to that tactical level that can be utilized? Not digressing too much from a strategic, because that still needs to happen on the intel side, where we're going to place our resources, how many of those resources, what are those threats going to be, that's still that that's still that coming up to that intel. So once we have it, that we take all of that intel and we apply it now. So now we can tell that forward observer, we can tell that emergency personnel that are there, what actions would be best to take with all of this intel gathering. Fire detection for us is obviously big. For CAL FIRE, our mission is to suppress 95% of our fires in 10 acres or less. The director spoke about fuels management today. We are heavy within our fuels management and will continue to be. Is that plays into our intel as well. That's kind of our pre. So a lot of resources that are out there, as Chief had said, harnessing that technology. For us in the operational field, how do we harness that technology and how do we apply it? So how do we make it as easy as possible? How do we make it that it can have dirt all over it, spaghetti sauce, and still work? And that's what we need assistance with.
Okay. Nicole, did you want to add anything?
I think that if I had to break down signals into different sort of components, which is what we do, I would break it out into three main conventional sources. So one is just information which is live and updating all the time. So these could be remote sensing, these could be river gauges, tidal gauges, seismographs, etc. So that's one large component. The second component from signal intelligence is what I look at from infrastructure or demographic. So when was it last retrofitted? How many floors was it present? How many people are potentially living there? That's another sort of signal we look at. And the final sort of third signal I would look at is just is the natural environment. So when was the last soil samples collected? What was the topography like? Where are the trees in the area? So I would bunch it into those three large signals. And when you sort of look at all those three conventional sources of information, it provides you a much larger clarity of what information would look like. But it's not just important, it's important to, however, understand what is the unintended consequences of using these conventional sources. So we need to understand what is the spatial coverage, what is the temporal coverage, how consistent or inconsistent these sources are, how confident we could be on these signals. If you look at just an example of maybe Uber Eats or Instacart, they're already using a lot of signal intelligence to do something what we would want to do in the disaster space. So let's just take, I want to order lunch at 12 o'clock and I paid $13 for my salad. What Uber Eats is probably doing is predicting what the traffic would be then, predicting what supply demand would look like, predicting then later what price it should be, and then even recommending what food you should be doing. So all of those 4 different questions are similar questions you would want to answer in this space. So why is that should be possible? And think, yeah, that's how I see it. And the final component I want to talk is unconventional data sources. So we are thinking about a lot of conventional data sources, but there's several unconventional data sources out there. Even information about, is my TV on or not? Am I having cell phone coverage? How many is the substation done or not? Can all be collated to give you a slightly more granular insight of what's happening on the ground. That's my thought. Yeah.
Okay,
Yes.
great. So I'm going to open it up here after kind of one more question for the panelists, and so to help frame some of our discussion. So if you have questions, which I hope you have plenty, then we'll open it up again. But I did want to get across what the panelists think as far as, what are sort of some of the current gaps in situational awareness and alerting for operational applications for fire weather professionals. So if anyone wants to touch that one.
I'll kick this one off also. One of the things that we see is we're taking a lot of weather data in, and as we're making decisions, we find out a lot of areas have microclimates that don't fit into a common picture when you're taking the humidity, the temperature, the wind, etc. These microclimates, when we have a fire in them, may do one of 2 things: be explosive or not fit the model and go out before we have to expend a lot of resources on it. So one of the gaps with programs, technology, is taking into account these microclimates and being able to fit them in and make informed decisions.
Maybe I'll just add to that. Yeah, I guess the microclimate issue of the microclimate and predictability of weather at a fine scale is an ongoing one for a whole range of natural disasters, including wildfires being the most pertinent one, but also flash flooding comes to mind in that context. The other one, which we are seeing a fair bit of activity around, in Australia at least, is the uncertainties associated with weather predictions, and how does that get manifested in a wildfire model. So the Bureau in Australia, the Bureau of Meteorology in Australia, is very soon coming up with an ensemble output, and our work has been quite focused on providing an ensemble understanding of what the wildfire-related output looks like based on the ensemble weather input. So that's kind of the other one which we think is quite important, because there's being able to represent that uncertainty effectively and in a manner which is actionable is quite important.
I'd like to add that I agree with that. Because there is a lot of research in terms of micro weather prediction. Now, do we incorporate that or do we not incorporate that? I think it belongs to what stage of the disaster are you and how important is information to you at that time, as well as very clearly articulating what are the inaccuracies or uncertainties of ingesting those data sets. It's highly important. So one part is obviously the technology gap, like what can we do with technology? But the second part, which we don't think about too much, is how do we disseminate that information? How do we really look at a map and specify, that's actually 50% inaccurate because that's where the data is coming from, or that data is going to actually update 3 hours from now. How does somebody immediately look at a map, get all of that information enough to actually create a decision on the ground, and then even communicate that to stakeholders around you? So I think those 2 are pretty large issues. Yep.
Phillip, you want to add anything? Good. All right, I'll open it up again. If you don't mind standing up and giving your name so that everyone can get sort of a sense of who all were there. Anybody have one that they, yeah.
Gordon, if I could just hold on, we do have microphones
Oh, we do, good, excellent.
With the Calaveras Resource Conservation District. My question is to Phillip. We talk about this technology and all this intelligence for doing catastrophic fires. Is there anything that CAL FIRE is doing to predict and allow good fires to, be allowed on the landscape? Because it seems like we've already gone through this whole cycle of having fires, stopping fires. Everyone's been talking about catastrophic fires, understand that. I'm just curious on if there's this intelligence used for allowing fires to proceed in a good manner, if humidities and the landscape can absorb that.
Sure, absolutely, and a lot of that is through our delegation of authority. So we have a small initiating fire, we call it IA, initial attack. If it's not picked up before 10 a.m. that morning, just like the presentation that we had seen, goes into extended attack. If it's not picked up then the next day and we decide there's a large logistical support, it might be an extended attack or a major fire. And with that major fire, if there's an incident management team or someone that would come in that would help assist that local agency, they get a delegation of authority. And within that delegation, it will give specific parameters based on your agency administrator. So if it is a forest health issue or a forest health consideration of light hands, if it's a wilderness area, if it's no mechanical abilities within there, then all of those tactics will be incorporated within the operation spectrum for that fire to mitigate it and or to propagate it, to corral it into one way or another. So absolutely, and I think that with some of our state of the fields, it's more apparent and it's more widely used with us as an agency today than it was 50 years ago. Is there a consideration for it? Absolutely. Will there be in the future and looking forward? Absolutely. When I say that we try to suppress 95% of our fires at 10 acres or less, those are initial attack. Those are within like our what we call our WUI, so our wildland fire environment, right? Next to structures, communities, threatened places.
Okay. Do you have the mic back? Okay, so we're going to do one right here, and then we'll shift over to the other side over here, so balance things out. So go ahead.
Hi, Neil Bregman. I'm the emergency manager with the city of Santa Rosa Fire Department. So obviously in October 2017, we had catastrophic wildfires of our own in Sonoma County. Since then, I think last year in fire season, we had 10 or 12 red flag warnings. And as you know, because you're probably on the conference call, chiefs, every single one of those, because our community is very shell-shocked and kind of on edge, we're calling, asking to upstaff for resources and additional upstaffing for every single one of those. Red flag warnings are a National Weather Service product, and you again know better than I do, not all red flag warnings are created equal. How do we, to upstaff properly, the real important ones, whether it's the lower RH and the higher winds, how do we somehow come up with a product for the local government, for the local fire chief saying, this is the real bad one, these are the conditions versus, sure, upstaff for a red flag, but this is the, whether we want to call it a black flag or a purple flag down the road, how do we flag some of those 10 or 12 that this is really the one you need to lean into more than just your run-of-the-mill, it's fire season red flag?
Yeah, Brian?
So I'll take that one. You bring up an interesting comment about red flags. Maybe it's a black flag. If you look at the National Weather Service, they have a lot of colors that deal with different weather patterns. So that may be something that we address in the future, taking your feedback. One of the things that we're doing in California now is what we call pre-positioning. And we're doing pre-positioning not only for extreme weather events for a wildland fire, but also for the mud and debris flow, primarily in the burn scar areas. But we have a matrix that we're using that we plug data into to come out with an output to make an informed decision. As we look at technology today, being able to get more of this technology from different sources that is in real time, that we can make decisions on upstaffing, pre-positioning resources, moving resources that are appropriate for the mission. That will make us a lot better in our ability to react quickly to an emergency. So again, technology is evolving faster than we can keep up with it, and it's events like this where we're taking everything, we're working with our partners, we're working with fire agencies to refine that product so we can make informed decisions. But you're exactly right. You know, just because it's a red flag day, does it mean it's the day where the disaster's going to occur? Maybe not. So the more data we have, the more accurate data, the ability to make an informed decision is our goal, one of the outcomes of this summit.
So to continue on to that, so a red flag warning, so the National Weather Service, we utilize those products for red flag warning. So within the state, we do have weather offices that will assist in that, as well as in each GAC, we have a predictive services unit that is interagency. DOI, Forest Service, CAL FIRE sponsored that would help in some of those decision-making efforts. So on a local level, on a city level, if we go down south to Corona and they know that there's going to be a red flag or a wind event, it's that coordination with not just units within their city, their local jurisdiction, but it's those surrounding ones as well, letting them know that they're having upstaffing in that continuous coordination efforts.
I'll just add apologies to anybody from the National Weather Service who knows more about this, but being on the periphery of it, this is a big issue for the National Weather Service because they recognize that this was a product that was designed for fire weather professionals, and now it's being used in a public setting, and that was not its original intent. So it has many false positives. In California, the number of red flag warnings is very large. So there's been quite a bit of attention on the part of the National Weather Service working with partners to try to tune that.
I'm just going to add a very quick. I suppose I'm from Australia, so I'm not 100% sure how it works here. But again, going back to the issue of uncertainties as well as the microclimate behavior, there are aspects to this which kind of lead to the non-ability to pick the resolution, right? To be able to say what's a red flag, what's a black flag. There's some advancements that need to happen at that technological level in order to be able to actually further refine your signaling, basically. And it might be better articulation of the uncertainties, better ability to actually deal with the microclimate behavior, and also assimilation of different data sets, right? That's also something that is quite important.
Okay, and I have a question in the back and then here, and then we'll move over to here, so.
Good afternoon. My name is Prakash. I just wanted to share one of my lifetime experience, having been an engineer in a defense contracting, where we build a real-time situational awareness for wartime kind of a scenario. And where it didn't work was when it came to people and priorities. The priority of the person at the edge, at the front end, and the kind of training of that person is different from the person who sits in a back office and taking decisions. How do you plan to address that kind of a scenario where you get the situational awareness to a post where you take decisions, or it gets to the firemen or the people who are going to confront those?
Anyone want to tackle that?
So your question would be, how do we take strategic level inputs and funnel them down to ensure that they're being utilized in a tactical level for those ground troops?
Yeah, what I was trying to get to is when we design something like this, one of the key things that we need to establish are who are the stakeholders. And in this case, or from this discussion, we seem to be discussing about companies, departments. At some times we talk about citizens, but there are more stakeholders involved in it. And the sensors would give data. They are very constant. They're not going to change. But the situation that I confront from a chief sitting in a post confront could be different.
Sure.
So getting information out is just as important as getting information in. And in the fire service, we've been relying on paper forever. And as we move into technology, being able to funnel real-time data to our firefighters out in the field is an area that we're moving to. And you know, in California, we move resources, fire trucks and personnel up and down the state. And being able to give a firefighter that's on a fire truck in San Diego moving to Redding for a wildland fire, giving him the real-time information is going to be important. When it comes to the public and giving them real-time information, one of the challenges is a transitory population. Visitors to an area. We already see this with the new program, the wireless emergency alert system, being able to use cell phone towers to give evacuation orders. But being able to give everybody in a community information so they can make informed decision is somewhat problematic, and that's one of the things that we're working on, not only at the state level, but the federal level, so people have that real-time intelligence data so they can make their own informed decisions. I can tell you I had a fire back in Kern County where I came from, and within moments of the fire starting, the cell phone and phone lines all burned up. And then the power lines burned up shortly after. Everything that we relied on to inform our citizens and also some of our firefighters went down. And we had to go back to Plan B to alert citizens to evacuate. So we have to have Plan A, but we also need Plan B.
Yeah, we're going to need to move on, so let some others. We had another question up here in the front.
Hello, Travis Kloffenstein, University of Iowa, of all things, from the Midwest. But a follow-up to your question back here, it involves the common operational picture, or whatever word you would use to describe what's the one main picture that at the strategic level you visualize all the incoming data. So it's a two-part question. One is there an existing single common operational picture so that vendors like academia or small businesses, we know what to write to, we know what to write the app to. And the follow-up question, perhaps Nicole, is are there standards that are being set? So this is the information standard that needs to come out because it has to be ingested by your common operational picture. And I understand the forward observer and the comment about strategic to tactical. You know, former military, I was a forward observer where I had like a battlefield-worn computer, and I could get data pushed to me. I'm not worried about the big strategic picture, just my little piece of the map. But we had to work a lot with Joint Coalition allies to get data of the same standard so that everybody could publish and subscribe. So as we're having a little piece of technology from the University of Iowa that's taking satellite imagery from the VERS and saying, hey, we can detect light wildfire starting maybe 11 hours than the current state of the art. How do we push that into your picture? How do we integrate that with others? And so that's really the question is who owns it and what are the standards?
Yeah, Nicole, do you want to take that first?
So from the common operating picture piece, we're trying to achieve that with the cities we're working with. So I can give you an example wherein we have the Seattle government on board, we have the insurance on board, we have the university on board, as well as we have a few private commercial sectors on board, all on a singular sort of ecosystem wherein they're discussing why does disaster matter to us and how can we sort of work together. We're doing a university alliance. We've done that with Stanford, we've done that with University of Michigan, with Texas A&M. So whenever we go to a city, we understand that all these different stakeholders need to be involved in the equation so that we are disseminating information according to a common standard. And I know that we actually had this question in our panel, but we didn't reach to. The ways in which academic vendors can help us is really give us localized understanding. There's obviously a lot of research already created about maybe Houston from Texas A&M. So how do we then sort of make that applicative as soon as possible to the people on the ground? Then it's important. The second part, which is public sector, is really understand that how can we make this applicative? How do you make a change on the ground? And so we work on very closely listening to the feedback. We work on even having people in the company, Craig Fugate, for example, from FEMA, who's part of our process and helping us understand how do we make technology really useful on the ground. And then the other three components of insurance and private sectors, it's just how do you make this positive influence over time. So how do we make all of these different stakeholders realize what are their responsibilities in the disaster space. Second question on standards. As long as you have the right stakeholders on the table and are discussing what different information is useful in what particular way, that's when you come to a standard. But you have to start with that first, because if you only have a limited viewpoint, then you very quickly start developing standards which are only efficient to a very select few of stakeholders. So, yeah. Yeah.
Phillip, could you maybe just put that in the context of Scout? I mean, are there standards that are required in order to get information into Scout?
Sure. So I think let's reverse engineer this, right? Let's go what our end state is. What are we looking for? We're looking for a common operating picture. We're looking for a collaborative tool that is made for the end user, for that firefighter to have the most situational awareness as possible, to bring in all of the data sets. I want to bring in BLM lightning data. I want to bring in full motion video. I want to bring in IR detects. I want to bring in the infrastructure layers so I can see roads, cell phone towers, veterinarian hospitals, any pre-attack maps that are there, old fire history maps. So is there a COP? We do have some. So we use Scout, which is a situational collaborative tool. We have ATAC, which is a military product, so it's an Android-based, it's a tactical assault kit, and there's other companies that are out there, so Raven. So what do those need to, most of those are, they like to ingest. So when we talk about data parsing or URLs and how we can get that, the end state would be what mechanism do we have? We have a lot of data, so what is our standard? Right, absolutely. And then how do we get it to them? So even if we had everything and all of that ability, how do we transfer all of that data into something that's tangible for them? So what we have within the state is large gaps. So there's the Klamath National Forest that has drainages that expand over 2,000 feet. How do we disseminate that data down to that end user? And standards, absolutely, because it's something that we're still working through, and it's something that we need to definitely articulate, like this is what the deliverable is, so that as you as a private company coming in saying, hey, I have this sensor and a gimbal, I'm gathering all of this data, how do I get it to you? And that's something that, as the chief had mentioned, this technology, as it's increasing so quickly, that we need to be able to ingest that. So right now our COP would be that we recognize OES and CAL FIRE is Scout.
Yeah. Okay, we had a question here, I think, or?
Hi, my name is Sherry. I work at a school in Tahoe, and so my primary focus is the children's safety. And I've heard a lot at this conference so far at this summit about detection and prevention. I haven't heard so much, except for Mahesh touched on it a lot, was about evacuation and how technology can help with that. It seems from a lot of the stories I heard from individuals who experienced evacuation troubles at the campfire, some people were stuck in their vehicles for 6 hours when it was really only a half-hour drive in normal circumstances. So how can we use technology to better create systems? Specifically where I'm at, there's multiple counties and states that converge in Tahoe. How do we get all of those agencies on board to be working together for a great evacuation plan?
Who would like to take that one? Mahesh, did you?
Maybe I'll start.
Yeah.
Because I'm again going to be speaking about it from an Australian context to begin with. So I come from state Victoria, which is the capital of Victoria, Melbourne. I come from Melbourne. And we are working quite closely with the state-based organization around emergencies, Emergency Management Victoria, to come up with a system that can be used for evacuation planning. So to begin with planning and then moving forward towards operational use. So one of the key focuses that we've had, so there's lots of tools out there which actually can do modeling agent-based, like, either movement of people or vehicles or both in this instance. But one of the big challenges has been to include human behavior, right? So what we are doing at the moment is kind of figuring out how best to represent that human behavior using some actually machine learning approaches. And incorporating that into our agent-based models. And that's like the fine-grained level of how to actually look at different scenarios around evacuation. The other one that we've also been looking at is coming up with an evacuability score for the whole state. So that's more of a static approach where you look at the different parameters that can affect evacuation or evacuability. So the terrain, the roads, the type of roads, the demographics, the weather conditions in that particular location, historical ones. So there's quite a bit of activity happening there, and especially around schools, the big challenge that we have is you've got, when there is a scenario, you've got to get the kids out of the school and into the vehicle. So it's actually sounds like a fairly simple task, but it's really, really hard. So they're starting some work there around identifying schools that are at risk and using that as the basis to come up with some fairly well thought out evacuation plans. So yeah, things are happening, but yeah, look, it's especially collecting relevant data is hard, and then you've got the policies and integration with common operating systems is also another challenge. So that's where we are at the moment.
There's someone else, Nicole?
We did a small sort of proof of concept with actually, I think, George, which interns from Georgia Tech, and hopefully we will be expanding upon that research exactly in the focus area of evacuation. What we looked at was, once we are able to understand where the fire is and also predict where the fire is going reasonably with a decent amount of accuracy, you can very clearly square off which roads are impacted and which roads are no longer traversable. Then you collate that with real-time traffic information and with an estimated congestion factor, which is the hard part which Mahesh was talking about from the human scenario, and then look at, okay, these are the potential routes which you should be looking at in terms of both suppression activities as well as evacuation activities. And This is a problem, obviously, not just in wildfire, it's also a problem across all hazards. So we've been trying to do that across seismic, flood, and fire, really focusing on which roads are impacted due to liquefaction or are inundated or are currently has an active fire going on, and then couple that with what are the demographics in your area and how do you evacuate who when. So. Yeah.
Okay. We had another question, I think, in this area. Oh, maybe not. Okay, right there. Yep, right.
Just
Hello.
just one second.
Sure.
When we're done, come talk to me afterwards, and we'll talk about a case study.
Great.
Hello. Well, first of all, thank you very much for all the work you do. I plan to live here my whole life, and it's pretty terrifying. And so it's hopeful that you guys are so good at what you do and that you're out here risking yourselves. So thank you very much. Just continuing the theme, it seems like these tools you have are going to be in everyone's hands in a few years after that. So it kind of gets to the whole message discipline. It's kind of all just flowing around. And so is that just business as usual, or do you see a worrisome trend where people are going to have as good as data as you with strategic and tactical insight, and before you even tell them, where the evacuation routes are, they're already moving? Is that just sort of the way of the world for you, or is that a trend that you notice?
So here in the state, we have a Ready, Set, Go. And I think that a lot of the data that is coming in, there's so much. California definitely has a lot of disasters, so we're a little bit more familiar with how to mitigate some of those. So my thought is, yes, it's coming and it's here, and we're going to continue to build on that. So is there going to be better efforts or continued efforts to notify public and the constituents? Absolutely.
Okay. I mean, yeah, go ahead.
I'll just follow up. One of the things that we look at is like Florida, where they have, a hurricane coming in. They're able to turn all their roadways to escape. So we look at all of that, how the other states are doing it. Again, all hazard environment, because you have a wildland fire, and then in the rainy season you have a flood. So we're looking at that. It's educating the population, all hazard, and making sure that everybody knows what to do. And where we rely on technology, again, when it fails during an emergency, you have to have that backup plan. So this is a very complex issue. We're working on it. We have not stuck our head in the sand, whether it be the state, local, or even the federal level. We're working on being able to evacuate people to get them out of the way safely.
Okay, maybe Nicole, and then I'll...
What you're asking is actually a very difficult problem to solve. Number one is trying to figure out how would human behavior be in existing conditions, and number two is now adding in the assumption that, say, everybody is connected and everybody knows where the fire is, how would they behave? Given that we don't have any historical way of seeing how would people behave, it's a pretty hard problem to solve. So I think we need actually academia to help us out here to exactly solve that question you propped out, but it's a very, very important question. Thanks for that.
Okay. Well, let me try to do the 30-second summary here. It's just been, hopefully, I think you've seen it as well as I. It's just been a very useful panel. I think the first message is, Caroline's message is what should be an outcome that comes from these 2 days is, what actions, can be taken. And also we can see the breadth of interest in terms of from the public sector, the research community, academia, commercial sector, and the general public, and all the people that are impacted by these things. I think some of the other key messages, again, are sort of what can you do in advance? And we've heard that already through a number of other presentations. you know, what information can we take advantage of using AI and other ways to be able to get some estimate of what's likely going to happen once something happens, and then that initial attack period, how critical that time frame is in order to be able to deal with these things when the issues are small, and how all this signal intelligent information, this flood and the fire hose of information is coming down the pike. How can that really be used effectively? So with that, let's thank the panelists again. Sharon, do you have anything you want to say? Okay.
Thank you, John. Thank you, panelists. That was really great. And thank you for the people that had the last couple of questions. That's a great segue into our second panel, which is all about situational awareness and decision making. So we're going to take a 15-minute break now. Please come back at 3:30, and we will get going with our lightning presentations at 3:30. Good, how are you?
Good. Supposed to.
This was a perfect prep question that one person had
Yeah,
for
it's
your
kind of teed it up, right?
talk.
They're doing a mic check.
Yeah, it's a mic check. You're on.
Check. A little bit of feedback.
Did someone just turn you on?
Yeah, he said they were gonna do a mic check, so I don't know how long it lasts for.
seconds. All right, so we'll go ahead and get started. So the second half of our track here, we've got the same setup. We've got 2 lightning presentations and then followed up by a robust and exciting panel, so don't leave for the last panel. Our first lightning presentation is by Rich Drozen. He has 32 years experience at CAL FIRE and retired as a division chief for the Mariposa unit, and 16 years on their incident management team as both ops section chief and plan section chief. He's now also continuing on as a retired annuitant with CAL FIRE as their lead scout instructor. You heard reference to scout earlier in the first panel, and I believe he'll probably talk a little bit more about it in this presentation. So with that, Rich.
Technology, never trust technology, kids, or animals when you're doing a presentation. So if you could start the PowerPoint, if you have the PowerPoint. If you don't, I have it on the thumb drive. It's in the Scout directory. Okay, as Caroline said, we're going to talk a little bit about Scout today, and we're going to talk specifically how it was used on the camp incident, the campfire. And I'm going to try and put you all in the perspective of being an operations section chief. And a little bit, we were talking earlier on the sidebar, there's a fire hose of information that's coming at that operations section chief, and they're being asked to take a drink, to parse out what piece of information is relevant, what pieces of information make them better at making operational decisions. So using Scout, which is a COP, a Common Operating Picture piece of software, what we're able to do is we can package information for the division group supervisor, the branch director, the ops section chief, the incident commander, or people remote from the incident can view the information. A lot of times OES will be looking at it. We talked about North Ops and South Ops. Those are our geographical area coordination centers. They'll also be looking at that same data from a different perspective. From a strategic perspective, we're wanting to look more from an operational perspective. So, doesn't look like it's there yet. Hey, there we go. Okay, so once again, I'm an assistant chief. I retired from CAL FIRE a couple years back, and then they asked me to come back and help teach the Scout program and help move us through some operational choices that we're making with it. So this is the camp incident. The person on the right is one of the 3 operations section chiefs, and we're going to be all the information that we're going to be displaying is going to be pretty much packaged for that person. We have people that are looking at a laptop and they're gathering data, and then they also have the current operational map on a table. So they're trying to get as much information as they can in order to make good operational decisions. And there we go. So we're using data to inform operational decision making. What data helps us make the best choices in a timely fashion? So operations, strategics, and planning. One of the goals that we want to do when we're creating a strategic plan, which is basically our primary line, our secondary line, and our contingency lines. We always want to have what's our plan A, what's our backup plan, because the fire obviously doesn't follow our plan. Our plan is to try and stop the fire from moving, and it doesn't always follow the direction that we want it to. So we got to have a backup plan, and we got to have a backup to that plan. So our goals are to establish an informed primary, secondary, and contingency fire line. And then we want to quickly communicate and implement this strategic plan to the operational personnel. That way, everybody is literally on the same page. We all know that this is the piece of line that we want to contain the fire. If it crosses that piece of line, that's a good piece of information to pass up the chain of command, because now they need to know their primary plan isn't working anymore. Some of the required resources to go through and to establish this primary, secondary, and contingency is we need local knowledge. We need those local people in there, and in this case, we had the CAL FIRE Butte unit. Those are 2 of the chiefs that are sitting there. And
We also needed the U.S. Forest Service, the timber companies, and the team operations section chief. It happens to be the area of the fire that we're talking about right now is primarily CAL FIRE responsibility. As we go around the fire, if we go to the east over here, then we're going to be getting into the National Forest, and I believe it's Lassen National Forest on that side of it. And then different people sat down to pass on their information. So we use Scout with a projector, in this case, AFF, which is the aircraft, so we know where the aircraft are dropping, what the air tankers, the copters. AVL, the automatic vehicle location, so that we can see where's the equipment. Not all equipment has AVL. A lot of the AVL data is reliant on cell phones, so certain parts of the fire we don't have cell coverage. The CAL FIRE AVL fortunately has satellite connections, so we're able to communicate even when we're in a non-connected environment. And then the current infrared information. NIROPS, the National Infrared Operations, which is a collaboration effort with the feds. It's probably one of the best tools that we use that nobody knows about. We collect that information every night. They fly our fires, providing that we ask them to early enough. They gather that information and they pass it back to us, and we rely so heavily on that for our situational awareness and for building our plan for the next day. And then the last couple of years, we've been able to leverage National Guard, UAV, and vendor UAV data, and we'll talk about that more here in a second. The other piece that we really need to make good choices is what's the fire history? Where have we stopped that fire before? Where, in 1950, they were able to stop it on this ridge. Well, that's a good piece of information for operations section chiefs to know, because if the conditions are the same, and they aren't always the same, but a lot of times that's a very good piece of information. The last piece are the field treatment projects. We've been talking a lot about fuel breaks. We've been talking a lot about control burns. Well, the operations section chief, and that person that's standing right there, his name's Bill, he actually lives in Riverside. So he's up in Butte County. He doesn't know where those control burns are necessarily. He's operations on the team, so he has a very good understanding of how to fight fire, but he doesn't necessarily have that situational awareness on the ground understanding. So that's what we're trying to build today. So we'll okay, this is an older version of the slide, but it'll work. I must have grabbed the wrong one, that's my fault. So this is the NIROPS information. This red area right here is showing it's very hot and intense area of the fire. This little red line right here is UAV information that came from the National Guard. So we're able to take pieces of information from an infrared flight, layer over top of that the flight that came from the National Guard. They're able to put in some additional layers, and all we're doing is we're adding each of the layers up here underneath each of the data folders. So for the next couple of slides, we're going to stay at the same zoom level. We're going to stay at zoom level 14, and our focus area is going to remain the same. Right in here is Division Union, right next to this big finger. This is actually a firing operation they did along one of the it was an old railroad line. But I want you to focus in on the area here as we change data and as we change some of the slides. So if you're an operations section chief coming from Riverside, sitting here learning about the fire environment and the history and everything else, these are the pieces of information you want to see. You can see the drainage here, how steep some of this is on this map. Then as we switch, here are some of the old dozer lines, hand lines, and different lines. This is a 2008 fire. So we're starting to build that person's situational awareness. They're collecting more information. Here are some old, this is a fuel break that the unit has in place or would like to finish. It ties in some of the existing fires and fuel breaks. And then also some additional fire history. So moving forward, maybe. This is the actual strategic plan. What they're trying to do here is this is planned dozer line. So if we look right here, proposed dozer line, and it's a ... X. So this is going to be a secondary line. Their primary line here, and this is all X's, this is already dozer lines. Thank you, I'm going too slow, aren't I? So we have some additional information that we're trying to build here so that we can build this strategic plan. I'm going to change the background map a little bit, and we're going to go to a topo-based one. So now we can start to see some of the features. We've got a different topo. Up here in this Division Union area, what are these little areas here? Can anybody tell me what that is? Those are clear cuts. How operationally relevant is it to know that you have clear cuts on that section of the fire in this area up in here? So by being able to toggle back and forth between a topo and quickly go back and forth, and that's how the exercise went. I was running the computer. We'd toggle back and forth, and the ops person or one of the local guys would say, hey, can you switch that back? I want to see where the fuel treatment projects are. I want to see this or I want to see that. I think we cut along here down into this drainage in 08. So there was a lot of really good back and forth communications. And all of this intel, all this information has to be ground truth. Now you go fly it. Now you check with the branch director and you say, is our plan going to work? Can we put a dozer line along this ridge? So you need to ground truth and ground validate it. But a lot of the data is collected within the common operating picture. So once again, here's kind of the end result. We're switching back and forth. The next step and enhancement that we really want to see is we want to add GeoPDFs. And the reason why is because the National Forest, when they came up, they didn't hand us a paper map. They showed us a tablet with their GeoPDF and all their pre-attack information on it. So if we were able to overlay a GeoPDF the same way that we're switching from background maps to this map, now we're seeing all of their pre-work on top of AVL, AFF, where's the current fire, and what's our plan. Now we're starting to layer information, and we're packaging that information for that operations section chief. That way they're getting as much intel as they can, so they have as much knowledge, if not more, than some of the locals that are working on that incident. So this is a RFI process. Real quickly, this is how we tie in information with the National Guard. National Guard uses this, and we adopted it. And basically what we did was they said, draw a polygon, and then tell us what you want to know about that polygon, and we'll fly it every day, twice a day, 2 times a day, 3 times a day. And basically we identified, this one is called Ops 3, this is the third one. Identify any ember casts of ignitions in the yellow area for the duration of the red flag wind event. We had another wind event during the camp incident. And then report back any observations to Chief Bischoff. He was the day operations or the lead operations. And then, I don't know if it comes up. Yeah, it's an old slide. Down in here is the reply, and I'm sorry you probably can't read that, but it's the reply back that there was no ember casts observed, but there was a spot fire. So some information came back from that flight that was operationally relevant. And what this did for us was it's the first time we're able to take UAV information from the National Guard, kind of fold it into that common operating picture to answer the question that was there earlier, is try and get that information in front of that ops chief in a way that is consumable, so that you're not taking that fire hose of information that's coming at these ops section chiefs and trying to turn that into actionable information. So, oh, it did come up. Okay, so here's the results of basically when the RC-26 sortie flew, no ember cast identified, product to be uploaded. So they'd upload it as a KML. They'd also email, or once it came to us as a KML, then we would email it out to make sure the rest of the group could see that as a KML. And then they also followed up that they're going to continue monitoring. So the other piece of the puzzle here was the evacuations, repop, and utilities. This was a very good way to communicate evacuations, areas, and zones. And you can see over on the right, green was an area we're repopping, yellow, and then we used orange for residents that could go back 24 hours. A lot of residents, we only let them in for a few hours because it was unsafe for them to be in at night because of all the falling trees and some of the other issues that we had. And then the red areas, basically the town of Paradise, were still in evacuation order at this time when we took the slide. But this, let's see if I can get to the next one. This allowed us to coordinate. If you look, that's PG&E, AT&T, the EOC, and all of the utilities would coordinate twice a day on a single map, and then that information would get into Scout and would be communicated to the rest of the group. So 1 minute, okay. And we're down to safety officer from the team, liaison, law liaison, utilities, power, communications. What do we need to do to stand up the infrastructure to allow people to get back to home and some semblance of normalcy as quick as we could? And we did that through a common operating picture for all responders. It's an essential piece moving forward. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Rich. So next up, our last lightning presentation is going to be by Vance Taylor, a colleague of mine. He's the Chief of Office and Access and Functional Needs at the California Governor's Office of Emergency Services. He's responsible for ensuring the needs of individuals with disabilities and persons with access and functional needs are identified before, during, and after disasters. Born and raised in the Bay Area, Vance was diagnosed with muscular dystrophy as a child and uses a power wheelchair. He has worked in Washington, D.C. as an advisor to 2 members of Congress, directed security policy at a National Water Association, and been a principal at a top-ranked Homeland Security and Emergency Management consulting firm. Vance is nationally recognized public speaker and advocate for individuals with access and functional needs and disabilities. He has a master's degree in Homeland Security from the University of Connecticut and an undergraduate degree from Brigham Young. And he is married to his sweetheart, Casey, and has 2 beautiful daughters. Vance. Do we have a mic? Do you have a mic?
Yep.
Good.
And I think maybe officially ballerina now after I balanced that act. This ramp was a little stressful for me. Before I came up, the lady came and asked, "How much does your wheelchair weigh?" And I was like, "You got to be kidding me." And she's like, "No, it'll be fine." But how much does it weigh? You know, like, darn it. This is why we need to integrate access and functional needs. So actually it worked in well for the talk. We talk about access and functional needs, and I get the sense most of us know what that is. But just to be sure we're all operating on the same picture here, let me just define it real quick. We're not just talking about people with intellectual, developmental, or physical disabilities. We're talking about people who English is not their primary language. We're talking about children. We're talking about seniors. We're talking about people who don't have access to transportation or people in institutionalized settings. And so we're talking about a lot of people that I think all fall into categories of underserved, but collected together fall into this bucket we call access and functional needs. So in a country with 325 million people, we start looking at these populations, and it turns out that those with access and functional needs comprise a very significant amount of our national population. And yet, historically, we haven't done a very good job of integrating their needs or addressing their needs as it relates to emergency management. And Hurricane Katrina really put a bright light on that. Right? It was during Katrina we saw that 70% of everyone who died had an access or functional need. So what does that say about the way that we have planned for, prepared for, responded, and recovered with the access and functional needs perspective in mind? Now, what's interesting about it is it's not just large disasters. We see that there's a disproportionate impact on every single disaster, whether it's a fire, a flood, an earthquake, large, mid-size, small. So trying to get out in front of this, in 2008, the governor did what California does, leaned forward, and created the Office of Access and Functional Needs. And as the chief of that office, I'm appointed to implement a twofold mission. One is to identify what are the needs that we're talking about before, during, and after disasters. And second is, once those needs get identified, how do we actually integrate them throughout every facet of the emergency management process? And what does that look like? And let me give you an example of what it does look like. In 2015, just a month after I was sworn in, I got a call at my house early Sunday morning. Hey, State Operations Center, we need you in here right now. And I was new, but I'm not dumb. I figured that wasn't good. Sunday morning phone calls, not good. And it turned out that there were fires in Lake County. And what we were seeing was at the time the third worst fire in state history. I got briefed at the State Operations Center, and a few hours later, I'm rolling into Lake County. And usually, you go through this windy road, then you come into the canyon, the valley opens up in front of you, and it's beautiful. But it was not on that day. On that day, it looked like a scene from a post-apocalyptic movie. It was very eerie because the whole way in was very sunny until we got down into the valley, and then the ash hung in the air so thick, it literally darkened out the sun. Every car was going that way, and I was going this way. I started questioning my life choices. Remember the smoke was coming in through the vents on the van, burning my lungs. I was passing down trees. And when I finally pulled up to the shelter, it was chaos. There was cars, trucks, vehicles of every make and model, parked in every form and fashion configuration you can think of. Every way but the right way. Donations were being dropped off already, and they placed them all in front of the curb cuts. And so I had to park illegally on the sidewalk in order to actually access the shelter. And I got in, and the shelter manager's taking me around, and I'm seeing bathrooms that are accessible-ish. I'm seeing that there's a lot of clutter, making aisles difficult to pass through. Cots are too close together. And as I'm seeing all this, I keep hearing about the showers. Wait till you see these showers, they're amazing. These showers are the crown jewel of our shelter. And on, and we get to the end, and I said, where are the showers? He goes, right through this door. And I said, is there another door? And he said, no, why? Well, the door in question, it was a set of double doors, divided down the middle with an iron bar, making each individual passageway too narrow for my wheelchair to fit. And he said, well, what if I just get behind you and push really hard? I said, you'd probably break my chair. I don't know. What would happen? Let's try it. No, we didn't try. I said, there's no way I can make it through that doorway. And he stopped for a minute, and I could watch as the wheels were kind of turning. And you could see, ding, the light goes on, and he says, but if you can't make it through, neither can anyone else in a wheelchair. And I said, now you got it. Right, so I got on the phone with the State Operations Center, and I said, we need to get some portable accessible showers at the shelter. How many do we have immediate access to? And they said 5, and I said, because it's a true story. I'm on for a month. California's like the 6th largest economy in the world, 40 million people. I swear to you, they said 5, and in my mind, I heard 500. And I was like, that's incredible. I was gonna be like the Oprah Winfrey of showers, right? Like, you get a shower, and you get a shower, and we all get showers. And they're like, calm down, Vance, we meant 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And I was like, well, that's less cool. And they were all being utilized at a concert in Southern California, which is total junk because nobody showers at Burning Man. And so, left with no other options, we dropped the G word, governor, and we commandeered these showers. As a side note, let me just say this. If you ever get the chance to commandeer something, do it. It's amazing. But it goes to your head real quick. I got home and I was like, I commandeer the remote. I commandeer the salt shaker. And my kids got sick of it real quick. So we identify the resource and we commandeer them and procure them and deploy them and set them up. And it took 4 days, which for government is breakneck speed. And yet for the individuals of that shelter who needed those showers, 4 days was an eternity. And I remember I was talking to one of my colleagues, and I thanked him. He put in a real Herculean effort on this. I said, yeah, thanks again for helping me get these showers. He says, hey, just doing my job, which I appreciated, right? You didn't see it as special. It wasn't like an extra, and I thought that was great. Well, however, I also didn't get the sense he truly understood the impact of what he had done. And I said, let me just tell you what I saw when I went to the shelter that day. I saw people on the worst day of their lives. People who were homeless, through no fault of their own. And I talked to people who had to evacuate their homes so quickly that one lady told me her neighbor literally picked her up out of her chair, put her in the bed of his pickup truck, and took off. And she watched as her home burned down with her wheelchair inside. It was hot and muggy, and we were sweaty, and ash, which was everywhere, sticks to sweat, and it forms a grime that covers your body. And I had to be the one to tell those individuals that because we hadn't integrated for their needs, that they had no choice but to sit in their filth and wait until we could come up with something. So I said, can you imagine for just 1 minute what it must have been like when that first survivor went into the shower and flipped on the water and had those clean, refreshing droplets cover their body? I had a survivor tell me afterwards, I felt like me again. And it broke my heart that we had to wait 4 days to give them that. Now, that experience changed me. And it changed my colleague. And it changed our agency. And that reverberated throughout the state, which is why when 3 years later, I went to Lake County again for fires again, and ended up at the exact same shelter in response to what would become the largest wildfire in state history. What I saw showed me just how far we'd come. There was signage everywhere. Parking spaces were designated. Bathrooms were accessible. ASL interpreters have been integrated into the response communication operation. Specialized dietary considerations have been accounted for. Our disability stakeholders were not only informed, but our independent living center had partnered up with our functional assessment service teams and gone cot by cot, talking to individual to ensure their needs have been met. And yes, I'm happy to tell you, portable accessible showers were on scene by the time the first survivor came, because we had ordered the resource in advance of the emergency declaration. So we have made tremendous progress. And as a state, we lead the nation and the world in whole community planning. And that's fantastic, and I'm immensely proud of that, because it hasn't been a one-office thing. It's been a partnership. Emergency managers, first responders, government, but also individuals, stakeholders, and committed organizations. And yet today we find ourselves in a situation where there is an ever-increasing number of disasters every year. there are more and more and more fires every year. And it's not just that the number's going up, it's that the intensity and the severity and the devastation associated with those fires is increasing. And we find ourselves at a very significant crossroad where if we do not innovate the way that we integrate access and functional needs, we will lose our ability to meet the needs of those we consider the most vulnerable among us. What does it say about us if we don't utilize the technology, the tools, and the capabilities that are available at our fingertips to save the lives of our whole community? And so I preach and teach and evangelize this message about integration 2.0, where we use artificial intelligence and machine learning as a force multiplier to enable emergency managers to save the lives of people with access and functional needs, right? I'm not just talking about developing tools that identify when people are in need, where they are, but also developing tools that will automatically deploy the accessible resources required to evacuate them safely. It's this vision and this partnership that really brings us here today. Because whether we're talking about emergency alert and warning, or whether we're talking about any other use of technology as it relates to wildfires, ultimately the outcomes that we're driving and aiming towards is moving away from artificial intelligence and into the space of life-saving intelligence, where the function fundamentally and frankly far surpasses the actual technology itself. And so that's the vision and that's the mission. And I believe that it's something that people are committed to doing. But right now we've got a lot of good people doing good things that aren't quite empowered to know what it is that needs to be done in the same way that we maybe didn't know 3 years ago that we needed portable accessible showers. As tools are being developed, this perspective needs to be in mind. As we're designing methods to reach people, this perspective needs to be in our mind. We need to look not just at new tools and systems and platforms that the government can and should buy, but we need to look at vitalizing, revitalizing, and innovatively using the technologies people already have in their homes. Is there a reason why Siri doesn't tell me, hey, there's a fire, you might want to get out of here? Alexa tells me when a package arrives, but she can't tell me that there's a disaster? I have a smart home that the lights will fluctuate based on my preference when I enter a room, but they won't flash on and off to alert me that there's a problem? Google Maps can get me to any Domino's pizza I want, but it can't automatically populate the escape route I need to evacuate my community? This is not new technology. Again, it's utilizing technology in a way that we haven't before. We look at things like Project Maven that we read about in the news, the DoD using particular technologies in a way that has Google employees quitting. And I would say that we cannot uninvent that technology. We can't uninvent prediction tools. We can't uninvent detection tools. We can't uninvent the technologies that are used to find bad guys in a sandbox and use them in the way the military refers to put warheads on foreheads. What we can do, however, is put a humanitarian face on those technologies by using them to save individuals with access and functional needs, and ultimately our whole community. So I get it. It takes a second to wrap your arms around it. And my arms don't even work, but that's different. But that is ultimately, I think, the mission and the vision. To close, I will simply say this. When we look at any type of movement like this, and this shift, if you will, and it is a cultural shift, right? To take the things that we used to do and why we used to do them, and just to view them through a different lens, and understand that there's a greater purpose in how we can use those tools. It's a lift, and it will take government, and it will take the private sector, and it will take community stakeholders, and it will take us working in partnership. So you lift and I'll lift, and together we'll ascend. Thank you.
Thanks, Vance. All right, so we're going to end with our panel. So if our last panelist can come up and join me here on the stage, and we'll jump right into it. So the last panel is on situational awareness. So we talked earlier about the signals and all of the flood of information and the sensors and data sets that we're collecting and trying to analyze and understand. But the key is to the users of that information, making sure that we're presenting it to them and the analysis of that information in such a way that they can understand and make decisions off of it. So this next panel is focused on that concept of understanding and analyzing the information, and then being able to push it out to the decision makers so that they can make the decisions they need to make to be able to improve the outcomes for those that are impacted by these disasters. I think we're getting the microphones too, right? Okay. So panelists, you're welcome to either come up here or speak from the table there. Our first panelist is Brian Woodbeck. He is our Deputy Chief at Cal OES of the Operations Section, and he's oversees the California Fire and Rescue Mutual Aid System. The Operations Section coordinates the response through the mutual aid system that includes response to the major wildfires, earthquakes, tsunamis, hazardous materials, and other disasters. And I gave each of these panelists a few prep questions. So the key questions that they're going to be speaking to are, what are the challenges and opportunities for real-time situational awareness? How do we use tech to create a common understanding? So we've talked a little bit about a common operating picture. Some people talk about a common operating data because the picture may be different depending on the user. But ultimately, we're trying to get to a common understanding. And then how can we leverage all of this emerging tech to improve incident outcomes, such as effectively evacuating access and functional needs communities? So with that, I'll have Brian has his first comments.
Thank you, Caroline. So my job on a day-to-day basis is to manage the mutual aid system as an operational chief for Northern California. During the week, I actually manage the whole state. We have a duty officer, duty chief, that reports to me of any significant events that happen in the state. I have a coworker, Art Torres, in the south that has the operations duty for the south. I basically cover my daily duties from Monterey to Oregon. So some of the challenges that I have is how to get real-time data to me where I can keep that operational picture in mind of what's going on a daily basis. This is a wildfire conference, but I have to look at all hazard, whether it's earthquake, a fire at a refinery, a high-rise fire. I mean, there's just whatever is going on in the state, a hazardous material incident, a train derailment, I mean, you just name it, we deal with it daily in California. So how do I do that? Well, you've heard about Scout, our state situational awareness platform. So the things I do with that is I immediately go to that platform and pull up data. There's tons of data sets in that program. There's been a lot of people that have worked on that program. So I use that as kind of my common operating picture of what's going on. One of the things that that program does for me is if I know that there's a fire in a certain area, I can immediately do a polygon on a map, and it will tell me the entire demographics of that polygon within seconds. It tells me how many houses are there, what the population is, how many renters are there, their ethnicity, the wages, everything you can think of demographic-wise. The one thing it does not provide me, though, is AFN information. So one of the challenges, one of the things that I've been bringing about is, wouldn't it be nice to know, and I've heard this actually a couple of times, I would love to have that polygon tell me how many AFN are there. And wouldn't the incident commander love to have that information so he knows that, okay, whatever that polygon size is, and also will tell me acreage, is how many are AFN residents. Because that will, there's after effects to that as far as the ripple effect of what is needed to help maybe evacuate those folks. So also, that polygon would be nice to have if I did that polygon, and I can reach over to our law enforcement folks. The IC can reach over to his law enforcement folks, and right now they say, I need this area evacuated. And our law enforcement folks go and they make that happen. Wouldn't it be nice if we do that polygon and it also tell us how many people, give us the evacuation routes and tell us how long it'd take, right? You do a polygon, it says 100,000 people there, and it'll take 3 hours to evacuate them based on live data on the information provided on the roadways and evacuation routes that may be blocked or whatever is happening at that time. So one of the things I want to see in the future, as far as operationally, is not only what's going on real time, and if you look at Senate Bill 901 that's been passed, and the CPUC is working right now with the utilities on the wildfire mitigation plans, a lot of the commonality of those plans, especially with the big three utilities, is the data sensors that they're putting out there as far as cameras and live sensor feeds. We can use all of those technologies that we're talking about today and tomorrow with all of the people here in the room, all the vendors, using that as a common operating platform of some sort, whether it's our state platform in Scout, there's wonderful companies in Terra, Esri, right? We've all got these things that we're building on, and we've got so much in technology that's coming at us. In the fire service, we've been slow to react to that. I came up through the ranks as a medic on the fire engine, battalion chief officer, right? And I've never seen the technology like we are seeing now. And I think that this particular event here is showing that, maybe a sensor that utility is putting out there to tell them when the wind's blowing their lines and they're seeing ground movement, well, why can't that same sensor get plugged into the earthquake warning system in California, because it's given the same data. We just need to redirect that data stream. So we need to look at, we're all kind of in our own little silos, and how to interpret those data feeds into a common operating picture that we can all use in our different disciplines. So thank you.
Thanks, Chief. Our next speaker is Dave Winokur. He's the fire chief of Moraga-Orinda Fire District. He's been in the fire service for 15 years in Fresno City, Alameda County, and Moraga-Orinda, where he currently is. In response to the threat of large-scale wildfires to his district, he's been developing a comprehensive wildfire risk system for Moraga Orinda using ground-based sensors for early warning and near real-time automatic fire spread modeling. He's also served as in the active duty as a Marine Corps infantry officer from 1997 to 2003 and has remained in the reserves. As a reserve officer, he has served as the commanding officer for the 4th Force Reconnaissance Company in 2014 and 16, and currently serves as the executive officer of the 23rd Marine Regiment in San Bruno. Chief Winokur.
Going to add this to my class action lawsuit about height discrimination. Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you all for coming. The piece of the problem that I'm worried about is a 42 square mile suburban fire district that's surrounded by wilderness areas that are characterized by their lack of persistent human observation. It's also characterized by the inadequate road network. Anyone who lives in the area, I invite you any morning or afternoon, come on out to see our real-world evacuation exercise, where through the morning and afternoon commute, we demonstrate that our roads are not adequate to move large portions of the community under ideal conditions. If you take those same attempts to move large numbers of people down those same roads in degraded conditions with smoke and fire to the road, those sort of things, I think it's safe to say we are going to have a very great challenge getting everyone out. And that challenge is going to be magnified even further if we don't know that we need to get everyone out at the earliest possible opportunity. So to solve for that problem, with support of our friends at the Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation, we've been fielding persistent ground-based sensors to provide reliable, ready now technology, early fire detection, so that we know when the clock is started and that we can then take that information and use it for something. And the answer to that something is, in our case, with the absence of a standing EOC, the absence of a standing emergency operations center that is prepared to receive the information. As you saw this morning in many of the discussions from the utilities, they all included a picture of a bunch of technicians sitting there with a wall of screens displaying vast amounts of information. Well, unfortunately, for all but the largest municipal areas, that is not our reality. We do not have standing EOCs. We don't have a staff that is sitting in a center waiting to receive information upon which to act. And so what we tried to do then is, through the automation of the integration of this information, is to replicate the functions that a staff would carry out using machines. If the information that says there's a fire needs to be inputted into a fire simulator to model 1, 3, and 5-hour spreads, and then that needs to be overlaid on top of existing evacuation polygons to produce time-phased evacuation recommendations, well, if we know that's what's required, why would we wait for a human to make those inputs? Why don't we automate those inputs? So we've done that. We validated it in December and January with full-scale evacuation exercises, and we're able to achieve, from fire detection, we're able to get the information out of the system in under 3 seconds and produce real-time evacuation recommendations in under 26 seconds. And the question then becomes is, how do we use that information, and how do we get that information? Because the fact that I, as the incident commander, have that information in my hot little hands is absolutely useless until I have managed to deliver it to the end user. And the end user in this case are the 38,000 residents of my district, all of whom have their own ways of digesting information. And not only do we need to get that information to them, and internally to the district, we had a very robust discussion about the efficacy of air raid sirens as an evacuation adjunct. And really that caused us to stop and think about the problem that if we were to buy air raid sirens, which I would not recommend to anybody under any circumstances, but if we were to get those and we pulled the hook on sounding those sirens, what we would essentially do is tell the entire community, hey, pay attention, there's a problem. We can't define what that problem is, and we can't define what that problem means to you, as in what are your best case scenario here. And in evacuation, in the event of a wildfire, that means one of 3 things. It means evacuate, if that is a viable option, which it may not be based on fire conditions, road conditions, and what all of the other residents around you are doing. Or it means movement to a temporary refuge area, if we have established one, if you are able to access it, and if once you get there, there is space for you in that temporary refuge area. Or it means shelter in place. Because of your list of vanishingly poor options at that point, sheltering in place in your inherently fire-resistive house is a better option than getting into inherently combustible car and sitting in a traffic jam, perhaps in the path of the fire. And the double whammy there is you may be sitting in a traffic jam in the path of the fire that we in public safety knew about as a result of our predictive fire modeling. So how do we get all of that information down to the individual to create personalized evacuation recommendations that allow those residents to maximize their survivability profile under those circumstances? And all of that, of course, comes with a caveat that it must be wrapped within a larger, comprehensive community risk reduction plan that reduces both the prevalence, the spread, and the intensity of wildfires through fuels mitigation and those things as well. I don't discount those, but obviously that wasn't the topic today. But so the answer to that is really what can we do now, and what existing systems can we partner with? As was referenced in the previous lightning round, Waze, Google Maps, Apple Maps get 1 million people in and out of San Francisco every day. That same using personalized recommendations, that same technology can be used to deliver personalized recommendations to the residents to get them out, while at the same time creating personalized response recommendations for the units that are coming in to suppress the fire. Because remember, at the same time that we are trying to move all of these people out of over the inadequate road system, we're trying to move a very large number of 43,000-pound fire engines in to suppress the fire. And all of this within a compressed time frame. If you look at the largest fires in the state of California, the ones that occur in urban areas that have the largest property loss or the largest loss of life are nowhere near the top of the list for acres burned. They're almost at the bottom. Some of them, 1,200 acres in the forest, that wouldn't even register as an event. That's Tuesday morning. Those same events, though, when they occur in the highly populated urban areas in the interface, during that first 30 minutes to 4 hours, when explosive fire growth is occurring, and the large existing campaign-style suppression resources have not yet been brought to bear, that's the window we're trying to solve for through the automation of these systems before the OES folks are able to mobilize all those resources, before the incident management team shows up with Scout and all those high-functioning, very capable staff elements that they showed previously. What do we do during that period before the people show up with the systems and the adjuncts to execute? And I think the answer to that is we automate, because the machine will always be running in the background. The machine will always be producing the solutions. And when you need them, they'll be sitting there waiting for you, instead of a whole bunch of folks from some far-off land rolling out of their beds in the middle of the night, rubbing their eyes and trying to figure out where Moraga Orinda is because they just got dispatched to come to our fire, and they don't know anything about it. So we can use your help, I'm sure, between the various entities represented in this room. There are the solutions that can be cobbled together to produce that personalized recommendations in near real time, and we look forward to working with the broader team towards solving this problem. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. And I only got to meet Chief Winokur a couple of months ago and invite him to. So if you need to rewind that to go over that again for the ask, that's one of the key needs. I mean, one of the key purposes of this summit was for us to be able to articulate what the need is, right? Because there's a lot of great innovators out there. So definitely rewind that part of the tape and listen to him again at half speed. All right, Jeff Berlin. So Jeff Berlin is from the Office of Standards and Effectiveness from the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, where he leads the development of new methods that make the use of machine learning and big data applications based on multiple sources of previously recorded aircraft profiles. He's a PhD in applied mathematics from Johns Hopkins University. Jeff.
Thank you, Carolyn, and thank everyone for coming here this afternoon. I feel humbled with my colleagues here at the panel. I'm not a firefighter, but I did start my career looking at ways that space-age technology could assist cities in fighting fires. Space-age technology then was our calculator, and 25 years later, they did place the fire station where I suggested it should go from a data-driven perspective. Science and technology, as part of the Department of Homeland Security, has a focus in working with its components, which include the Department of, the U.S. Fire Administration, the Federal Emergency Management Association, Customs and Border Protection. These are all components of DHS. And the Science and Technology Directorate has a mission to support those components in doing their job. What's key here is that FEMA in particular and DHS in general wants to work with the frontline operators, to provide you with resources. Resources, sometimes money, sometimes they're national assets that can be brought to bear to assist you in doing your job. This project that will describe is to specifically help state and local governments and tribal organizations be more effective in saving lives from wildfires. So in California, we have had close working relationships with CAL FIRE and Cal OES. We had a seminar just 2 weeks ago at Cal OES with emergency managers. Our project is to find out what are the essential information needs for you to be effective. And what better place to go than the firefighter or the emergency manager. And we appreciate what CAL FIRE and Cal OES did to organize those subject matter experts from around the state and to some extent from around the nation. We also went to Tennessee to get a different perspective. And in Tennessee, they had a fire that was in the national forest that, because of wind conditions, quickly changed and basically took out their command and control system. If that fire had happened 1 week earlier during Thanksgiving, there were over 100,000 people that had no clue what to do or where to go. Now, as it was, it happened a week later, and most of those people had gone home safely, thinking that Gatlinburg was a great experience. So timing can be everything. As a resource for understanding what are the essential elements, we need to take a very broad perspective. And so in our project, which was funded by the Federal Emergency Management Administration and its administrator, Brock Long, Brock was here in December of 2017 and realized the horrific loss of life due to the wildfire. And he wanted to know immediately what technologies may have flown under the radar to assist California and the rest of the country fight forest fires, specifically to save lives. So his focus was on getting people out of harm's way. And our focus as a project is to look at not the firefighting tactics or the building codes, which we realize are of critical importance in the big picture, but specifically what technologies are immediately available to assist state and local and tribal organizations to do their job. With that in mind, we had 3 workshops with California and Tennessee and emergency managers to find out what information is required. As some people have commented to me, that sounds like the best practice, to find out what the requirements are before you identify technology. But it is going to the subject matter experts, you find things that are unexpected. You learn, among all the information sources that Rich talked about coming to the command staff, what are the key things that they need to know and what form should it be in? So it is that synthesis of data elements, the sensor intelligence, that allows us to, I think, move the needle forward. In our project, one of the key elements, there are 3, basically that, and many of these are known to you, is this time criticality of decision making. This is not a fire that you can let burn for hours or days. It's not a structure fire where everyone within 20 feet of the building knows there's a fire going on. These are fires that sometimes happen in wooded areas that are not obvious to the surrounding public. They are very close to a built environment, and so there are many people at risk. Time is critical under almost all circumstances, but when you have 50 or 60 mile an hour winds, it's super critical. And so therefore, the command and control systems, the evacuation, firefighter safety, infrastructure, all are critical, and they must somehow be considered together. So we decompose the big problem of a wildfire from the ignition to getting everyone out of harm's way, evacuation, into several different areas. That of preparedness, because we wanted to recognize there is an important part of preparedness that goes into getting people out of harm's way. But the other topics involve detection, tracking, forecasting, alert and warning, evacuation, responder safety, and critical infrastructure. Our project is scheduled to be complete by the end of May, so I'm going to share with you 3 observations that we have made and that we have communicated or attempted to communicate with Brock Long before his departure. One is that detection and tracking have available state-of-the-art technology for you at an affordable price, requires a very little extra hardware to use, very little training. Rick showed you maps. The interpretation of the maps is something that will come with time, but the technology of interpreting maps is easy. This technology is available, and we think that we can make it readily available to the fire service. Second thing is evacuation. Evacuation is an extremely difficult problem, but there are parts of it that are not. And talking with Vance, he has a technology on his cell phone. It isn't Siri, but he has an application on his cell phone that could alert him of a disaster. The trouble is that application hasn't been stress tested to know what would happen if a whole community of AFN individuals received that alert simultaneously. Well, that's something that the federal government can help out. It can help do the stress test of that technology. But what Vance and I have talked about is that while we would all like a 100% solution, maybe a 70% solution now with technology that is readily available to everyone in that community is our first step. So while we have the common goal, we also have a desire to move the needle forward with something. Something is better than nothing. And responder safety, previous speakers have talked about the Homeland Security's ATAC system. They have various versions of that. The price is reasonable, it's $0. There is some hardware requirement to it, but this will help provide first responder location information. It can be deployed, and the federal government is willing to help out. So the fourth example I'd like to bring up is the routing of evacuation from an area that includes what the fire service needs to get into that area. One of the big problems in evacuation is the road out for many is the road in for the fire service. And they have to be coordinated. We have systems, as Vance talked about, that'll get anyone to Domino's. It'll tell you where there's an accident down the road. Using crowdsourcing, we can use that same technology to tell us that the road is blocked by a tree, the road is blocked by a bridge that's out. And with the involvement in the fire service to indicate what are the evacuation routes or what are the routes that they wish to use for ingress, that everyone can know and make some of the decisions on their own as to when they should leave and what route to follow. The complication of evacuation is not only the individual, but how do they get their horses out? How do they get their cats and dogs out? Everyone's individual problem is very complicated. Their list of responsibilities is larger than any single software package probably is likely to do in the near future. Involving crowdsourcing, involving an interactive platform where citizenry, the fire service, our emergency managers are all involved in trying to coordinate getting people out of harm's way, in a safe manner, is something that has to be undertaken with a sort of a new open mind toward involvement of our population making their own decisions. And this is something that FEMA has been working very hard to try to convey to the message that people have to be responsible for their own well-being, whether they're getting out of a hurricane's way, getting out of the way of a wildfire. We have a population that doesn't want to move. We understand that that exists, but there are more, it's my belief that most people will act rationally when given good information. So we think that with guidance to FEMA as to what are the technologies that will move the needle quickly and affordably, that we will make some headway. We also hope that this will provide an agenda for some long-term research on some of the bigger problems. But our goal is to make some movement toward reducing the number of people that are lost in a wildfire as quickly as possible. So thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. Our final speaker, and then we'll have about 15 minutes or so for some discussion and questions, is Kate Dargan. She's the co-founder of Intera, a geospatial software company that provides situational awareness for public safety. She was a career firefighter for 30 years with CAL FIRE and appointed by Governor Schwarzenegger to the top post of California State Fire Marshal. She currently sits on the board of the U.S. Geospatial Intelligence Foundation, the host of GeoInt, and the California Fire Safe Council. Kate?
Thank you, Caroline. Thank you. Are there any firefighters out here who have ever worked on a hand crew? So the position I occupy is called running spoon, because I am the last shovel on the line today, constructing line for information. So I am exceedingly heartened by the summit. Kudos to all of you for putting it together, because I'm going to tell first a little story about a time when this conversation was not this vibrant. And a little bit of my personal story, as Caroline introduced, 30 years as a firefighter. I was 8 years in an air attack position. I got a chance to fly all over the state of California, and sadly watching fires consume communities from roughly 2,500 feet aloft. I worked in the State Fire Marshal's office, doing my best to use prevention and mitigation as part of the issue. And when I retired, decided that I wanted to commit my own time and money to founding a company to help create the tools and solutions that we didn't have yet. So 10 years ago, excuse me, can you pass my water bottle down? 9 years ago, when Intera founded with myself and my two partners, thank you, we had to go out to our fire service customers because our vision was to connect line firefighters with the data that they needed during initial attack. And that was our mission. How do we put the intel into the hands of the first responder at the moment that they step into the fire engine and respond to the incident? So 10 years ago, we had our vision, we started the company, and then we proceeded to understand that when we went out to translate that vision to the fire service, we got a vacant stare back at us, because they had no idea what the word COP meant. We had to first teach the entire industry as we went from one department to the next what a common operating platform was. Sometimes we lucked out and found the military connections because they did know. That was 10 years ago or 9 years ago, and that has changed because now it's a vernacular. We understand what we're describing when we talk about that type of system. 2 years ago, I went to Dispatchr. Anybody here been to Dispatchr before? Biggest electrical utility conference that exists in the country, happens once a year. It's the biggie that you go to. I walked around Dispatchr, and I talked to no less than 50 people. utility companies, vendors, anybody I could chat with, and I said, would you like a system that allowed you to connect your data with first responders and second responders? These are the people who have critical pieces of information that we need in the first responder fight. And I'm just sad to say, the answer I got back to a person was something like, why would we do that? But that was only 2 years ago, and now the world has changed. So, to answer some of the questions that Caroline posed, from a company standpoint, it's our mission to connect, to standardize the data. We had the question from the University of Iowa there, and I'm an Iowa City gal. Yes, standardization is important. Collaboration, we heard this morning, is critical. Too many people want to hold on to their data and not share it with the person next door, even if they know how. There is a cultural issue with collaboration and connection that we have to overcome. So let me talk about the two problems that we've experienced as a company as we have gone around to our customers, which range from federal all the way to tiny little fire districts all over the western United States and beyond. And that is, first, there's a data problem out there. It's not a technology problem, it is a data problem in the sense that from a fire department's perspective, their profile is they are like teenagers with messy rooms. Their data is unstructured, it's old, it has poor quality, and they don't quite know how to connect it even internally, and then let alone between departments. So a lot of what we have to do is painstakingly guide a fire department through how to restructure data, how to get it into a standardized format, and how to stick it into an integrated operating platform, and then how to permission the users that are their adjacent neighbors, et cetera. So there is a lot of grunt work in the data management process of the fire service that we need to go through before we'll be able to envision these kinds of systems working quickly. The other issue is the users. The fire service is not a technologically mature industry. They have individual visions, which we can understand, but they do not have a common body of knowledge relative to how to use the technology, and they do not have a systematic training process on how to incorporate that technology. We'll talk a little bit about some solutions for that in a moment. They do have a highly structured workflow, though. It is hard to find a business out there that works in a more structured way than the fire service does. They do the same thing at the same types of incidents in the same sequence of events over and over and over again. It's a highly predictable model for which to wrap around your technological interventions. So what are some of the solutions that we can use to solve the data problem and the user problem that exists? One, understand bang. So for military folks out there, bang is the event. Bang is the fire. Bang is the dividing line between what comes before and what comes after. So to the right of bang, to borrow from military folks, to the right of bang is everything that happens downstream of the event. And we focus quite a bit in the responder environment on right of bang. But the solutions that we need to pay attention to have to come left of bang. It is the work that we are going to do left of bang to gather data, to standardize it, to compress it, to envision it, to train to it, to maintain it, and to share it. All of that work, and it's an extraordinary amount of data, and I don't just mean in petabytes, I mean the types of information that we need to gather. We are only scratching the surface describing those types of data today. All of that comes left of bang. The second is the Intel decision cycle. I would like to ask some bright research university or organization out there to strip apart the initial attack workflow by position or by task and stretch that into a timeline of Intel product events. So if you're a firefighter if you're an incident commander, if you're a command and control center chief, if you're a forward observer, if you're a division group supervisor, if you're an air attack, if you're a fire crew captain, or if you're a law enforcement officer, you have a very specified sequence of events that you have to perform to, and that sequence of events occurs in a predictable set of timeframes, and we can match intel products to those particular places, time and task dependent, with just a little bit of thought. We just need to get the right people in the room and map that out. Lastly, and I wanted to put in a plug for Senator Dodd mentioned this morning during general session, the Wildfire Warning Center. My personal opinion, we need to upgrade that conversation to a full-on fusion center. And the fusion center primarily to handle the left of bang issues that need to occur. We need a group of co-sponsored, co-authorized, co-funded agencies to envision what this can be from a fusion center perspective. Just a call out for us to support that as a champion. Lastly, and I want to say, from my perspective, where I sit, we handle wildfire issues all over the country. The one missing piece right now, just my opinion, is initial attack-oriented augmented infrared. That is the piece. It is the initial attack, the first hours of the incident, where the losses are accruing or where the decisions that need to be made relative to this emerging catastrophic event need to occur. And we could put, you can argue satellites aren't ready for that task yet. They're not granular enough. Drones have different altitudes. Low altitude is good for some occasions, high altitude others. Fixed wing, on-premise or persistent platforms, aerial platforms with manned crews can push out real time in a minute or less. And they are commercially available, but we have not asked them as a vendor community to respond to that need. And we could put real-time fire perimeters, and by that I mean 1 minute from collection to firefighters' mobile phones, 1 minute, in the hands of almost every firefighter in the country right now if we pointed and wrote a few checks. So with those things, and I do want to put in a pitch, if we're showing real-time IR perimeters to firefighters in a consumable way that they know how to make sense of at initial attack, that information should also be in the hands of the public that they're working with at that moment. It needs to be public information, those IR perimeters. Thank you.
So I see we only have about 10 minutes, so I'm just going to skip my facilitation questions and jump straight to questions from the audience. And we have a microphone that's wandering around. I think our first question is right over here in the center.
Thank you. Is this on? Is it? Oh, now you can hear me. I have a question for Chief Winokur. I'm from the Bay Area. I'm one of the unusual minority groups here representing citizen organizations, residents, and the Sierra Club chapter. We are the forgotten people. Residents are the forgotten people. Homeowners are the forgotten people. Every city that is looking at implementing a plan has no toolkit to follow, has no idea how to emphasize evacuations, how to engage with the residents. And I'd like to hear more from you. I know you had substantial media coverage in the Bay Area about your evacuation drill. I think it was December 15th in Moraga. And I'd like to hear how you engaged with your local officials in the area and directly in terms of organizing people. Are you working with neighborhood associations or other kinds of groups? How did you get into that grassroots organization?
Well, the answer to that question is all of the above. We have the advantage when you say marshaling officials, and I am the official, so that was an easy sell. The community is also hyper aware of the risk. I'm confident that 3, 4, or 5 years ago, had we been beating this same drum, we would not have gotten the same overwhelming response we're getting now. The response from the community has largely been, why aren't we doing more? And then we take that charge, that mandate seriously, and we recognize the opportunity this represents that we can change attitudes, can change behaviors, we can change the understanding of what normal in the fire district looks like. We can do that now while there is this heightened public awareness. And this is a transitory window that will not last long. That said, there's a little more to it than that. Engaging all the relative stakeholders, PD, community warning system, the neighborhood groups, we give an awful lot of public talks, and we ask everyone who's there to tell their neighbors, and really trying to emphasize that this is an all-hands event. That if we have a top-down view of how it needs to be and we're trying to do it just with government resources, it's going to be wholly inadequate, and we're going to be leaving this tremendous latent capacity that lies present within the community and just needs to be harnessed. And so the answer is it's the hard work of going door to door, the hard work of going to the community meetings that sometimes only 5 people show up, but 5 people walk out of that armed with an awful lot of information, and we ask them to tell their neighbors. And each one of them becomes a stone dropped in the pond, and that ripple then spreads. So I don't think there's any secret sauce or magic bullet here. It's just the hard work of engaging the community and then targeting the message to what the community will bear. If we go in with sort of doom and gloom, there's nothing can be done, well, we'll get everyone will believe that, but there's no call to action that ends with. And so we're trying to break this elephant of a problem into a bunch of small bites and give the community small bites they can take to help move us forward, understanding this is going to be a multi-year process.
Just one follow-up question. You talked about evacuation, in some cases basically sheltering in place. Have you developed a system of refuges, of areas, safe areas, which is kind of a new concept, I think, making the rounds in the wildland urban interface areas? And can you describe any of those?
Yeah, so we classify them as temporary refuge areas, or TRAs, which is not a new concept within the firefighting community, but it is a relatively new concept as it pertains to a place you can warehouse residents until conditions improve. And so that involves a couple of things. One, we have to identify them. 2, we have to do the pre-work there to make them viable if they are not already. Not all of us have a fairgrounds with 20 acres of parking lots sitting there ready to go. And in the case of North Orinda, there is one publicly owned facility in North Orinda, which is a school that is wholly inappropriate as a TRA. And there is a single commercial facility in that same space, which is also wholly inadequate. So we don't have any of the obvious ready-made things we can use. And so we're partnering with the homeowners association that owns the park that with a little bit of work can be modified to be made into a TRA. So there's the prep work, to Kate's point, the left of bang stuff to get it ready. But then there's the right of bang stuff of a TRA that is marginal and is going to require active defense measures to make it a viable space. That means we have to get a fire engine there. And that fire engine needs to have a water supply. Otherwise, we may be moving people from their houses, which in many cases will have been safer, to a TRA that's only a TRA once we get those active mitigation measures in place. And so what we're struggling with now, and the problem we're trying to solve for, is how do we, to the point I made earlier about the personalized evacuation recommendations, how do we deliver the real-time, updated, personalized recommendations? Because what I don't want to do is have someone who is closer to the safe evacuation route to the freeway. And we define evacuation in the case of the district as you are on Highway 24 and you're going east or west. Until then, you are not evacuated. So how do we communicate to someone that it is better for them to go to the freeway or it's better to go to the TRA? Because if we get that wrong, we're going to be moving someone upstream against heavy flows of traffic away from safety, because that person, in their moment of need, emergent, lots of things going on, they're going to take that definitive public safety word that you need to move to a TRA as the thing they're supposed to do, even though in their case, it's not what they should do. And so what we're struggling with now is how do we personalize these recommendations so we can maximize the survivability profile of each resident based on their circumstances, their location, and all of the other things going on around them, many of which are very dynamic and outside of our control.
We have a question over here.
Thank you. I'm a consumer advocate. I work before the Public Utilities Commission primarily, and I represent what in the language of the PUC is called vulnerable customer groups. I much prefer the access and functional needs language, but it's much the same population. both Vance earlier and the Homeland Safety representative were talking about how to get messages to parts of the population and get people to act. I didn't hear a lot about people who don't have the smartphone in their pocket, who don't have their own car, so when the evacuation message comes, have no ability to take action on their own, but are going to affirmatively need assistance to be able to act on the warnings being provided. The language of people doing the right thing, sure, there are some people who could evacuate themselves and maybe don't, but there are many others who have very complex reasons why they may hear a warning and not be able to act on it. So my question is focused on not just the average person and getting them to act in an emergency situation, but how you provide for the people who don't get communication through mainstream channels, who don't have the capacity to get in their own car that has a full tank of gas and get out the door. How do you plan for those individuals in these emergency situations?
Okay. That's obviously not easy, given that, I think to your point, each one of those circumstances are going to be unique, and those circumstances may change depending on time of the month, time of year, things that are hard to track. So understanding that this is not, the answer is there is no answer that is 100%, but what we have done to try to mitigate that issue. One, we use all of the above for notification messaging and include an admonishment in every public speech or talk we give is if you are notified, before you leave, you should knock on the doors to your right and to your left. And everyone does their own notification, physical door-to-door notification once they've been notified. The second part of that is the development of neighborhood-specific, organic, bottom-up resiliency plans that include identifying those who are at risk and at need. And that can be something as simple as a person can't get down a set of stairs. So the neighbors have the capacity to help that person get down the set of stairs if they have pre-identified that need and they've developed a person who's going to help them, a secondary or tertiary, because you never know who's going to be home or what time of day, time of year, et cetera, et cetera. The second part of that then is for those who cannot drive. You almost never see in the case of an evacuation that every seat in every car is full. And so once again, that bottom-up neighborhood plan, that who's going to get that neighbor who is unable or unwilling to drive and get them in a car to help them out. Because during the type of scenario we're talking about here, that first 30 minutes to 6 hours, what I tell everybody, to be brutally frank and honest, is help is not coming. We are not going to have any degree of reliability that we're going to be able to answer 911 calls during that period, because our limited resources are going to be doing the greatest good for the greatest number by being up on the hill fighting the fire, trying to prevent it from spreading. And mutual aid ambulances at the scale we're talking about for a community-wide evacuation, in time that'll be organized and come, but just during the initial periods there won't even be the surface street capacity to bring them in, much less the organized effort to identify the people who need that level of assistance. I mean, the commitment of an ambulance per resident who needs evacuation, that takes a great deal of time to organize. So the answer to that question is during the initial periods, at least what I have been advertising as our best swag at the solution during a resource-constrained initial operating period, is that bottom-up resiliency from the community that each neighborhood, and by community I mean neighborhood blocks of 4 to 20 houses, each neighborhood has identified who is at risk and who is at need in their community and who is able to provide that resource during the initial response to a large-scale event.
And I'm from the East Bay, so I'm familiar with your communities, and in communities like Moraga and Dorinda, personal cars that have empty seats in them may very well be a viable resource, but there are communities within California where it's not just scattered people who don't have access to transportation, but communities as a whole, personal transportation maybe is a much bigger deal. So I very much appreciate the appropriateness of what you're saying for the community that you're working with, but that's not necessarily a scalable solution in California.
So just in interest of time, Jeff, if you want to have a quick comment, and then I want to get one more questioning because I want to be cognizant that it's at 5.
All right. Well, to sort of support the idea of how complex evacuation is, whether it be hospitalized individuals or prisons, schools. It's a real challenge. DHS and Cal Fire has been working with Australia's Emergency Management Victoria, and they have a very similar problem. And the approach, I think, will involve a much broader community to try to find common solutions.
Thank you. And then one last question. Just speak up loud, yeah.
My question, though, is for Kate. Kate, a lot of us, and I'm Tim Woodbury from Splunk, a data analytics company. A lot of us in this room are technologists. Your experience, you talked about the problem of data standardization. What would be your top 3 wish list of highest value data sets that you think are really problematic right now for actually making use of with technology?
Do you mean what data sets that are purchasable?
No, I just mean out there, the highest value data sets for the fire community that you think are hard to access in terms of, maybe that is purchasable, maybe it's because there's a law that you can't, maybe it's because it's in a format that isn't very good to use.
They have generally poor access to demographic data sets. They tend to rely on census-based data sets if they have them. So I would say that one of the most valuable things that we could embed quickly in the fire service would be anything that gives them quick and structured ways to be able to do demographic analysis against their populations. So that's one. The second is I don't know that you can make it into a single data set, but from the wildfire perspective, not the fire service as a whole, but the wildfire perspective is that the ability to give them consumable remote sensing intelligence, even on an on-demand basis, but ready for consumption the way that they need to use it, would be another commercial venture or proposal that I would say. It's very hard. The fire service thinks of data sets or remote sensing as the entire package that they have to go out and kind of own themselves. And I don't think that they currently understand what is commercially available on an image perspective. And so I think I'm racking my brains, but that's 2 out of 3. Keep going? Okay.
Well,
if I could add a third,
absolutely.
Please. Biomass, fuel modeling. The current standard is LiDAR. It's tremendously expensive. It's very hard to organize. You have to physically bring in an airplane and fly it around. And consequently, everyone who has data has old data. The base map is the 30-meter land fire with a 60% accuracy. Specific to Orinda, the Orinda View subdivision, 18 homes, land fire misses it, doesn't know it's there. So in the absence of that, the fuel models are used to run the fire spread predictions we all use. And if we're running those fire spread predictions on a fuel model that has a 60% accuracy rating and 30-meter mosaic tiles, we're garbage in, garbage out. And we could use a lot of help in the ability to run that data regularly to show the efficacy of fuel treatments every time we do either prescribed burn or fuels mitigation. Right now, we don't have any of that. And we just sort of swag it and say, yeah, that looks better than it was. Therefore, we must have done good things.
Yeah, I'll see a fuel set and up you a hyperspectral. Because if anybody can put together an affordable hyperspectral LiDAR mix for fuels out there, we could use that.
So I want to thank you all. I'm sure we could keep going, but I know that it's late. One, I wanted to thank the audience, all of you, for coming to the summit today. Hopefully you're coming as well tomorrow. I think it's really wonderful to have an engaged community to talk through these issues, because as the initial panels in the morning were talking about, that it truly is a collaborative effort. Certainly in Cal OES, that's literally what we do, is bring everyone together and talk about it, and that's the only way we're going to be able to solve these really big, complex problems. And lastly, I would really like to thank the panelists. Appreciate your time and energy into your comments. Thank you all.